Hey team, in this section we are going to be going over daily ads management explained. So we're going to go ahead and break down the entire ads process that is all involved with the daily management process. So if you remember what the advertising stages look like, here is what they are. So step 1, which was all about the pre-launch step, stage 2, which was all about launch, and then stage 3, which was what we call the daily management for profitable acquisition, right? So very similar to how we went ahead and talked about the pre-launch setup had multiple trainings within it. As you already know, we have already been breaking up stage number 3 into multiple trainings as well. And so if you are now at the daily management training, so you already know that, hey, we've already now talked about the profitable acquisition training. And remember, the reason we did that was because how are you going to do daily management for profitable acquisition if you don't actually even know what profitable acquisition is, right? So in that previous training around profitable acquisition, we did speak about, hey, all of what is involved with the topic of acquisition. Things like defining acquisition, the acquisition metrics, connecting those acquisition metrics together, applying the concept of acquisition outside of advertising. Right? We went ahead and talked about all of the different parts of the acquisition systems and machine, as well as specifically when we say, hey, positive on acquisition, negative on acquisition, break even on acquisition, you now fully understand when we say, hey, you got to do daily management for profitable acquisition. Well, guess what? You actually now know what that profitable acquisition piece of everything actually looks like. And so now all we got to do is we just got to go ahead and fill in the gap and talk about the actual daily management piece of everything, right? So now we can actually go ahead and talk about, cool, what does daily management actually look like? And that's exactly what we're going to go ahead and talk about right now, which is what are the steps for daily management. So there are going to be 4 steps for daily management that we're going to go ahead and walk you through right now so you can go ahead and understand what's going on here, okay? So step number 1 is going to be all about daily reporting. Remember, this is what we're talking about when we're doing our daily management. And again, now that we have the foundational understanding of profitable acquisition, we can now actually do these 4 steps with the purposes of making sure that we are profitable on the acquisition, right? So step number 1 is daily reporting. Step number 2 is tracking profitability. Step number 3 is daily judgment day. And then step number 4 is consistent ad works, okay? And so what that basically looks like visually is this right here: daily reporting, tracking profitability, daily judgment, and then consistent ad work. And then what we're going to do now is that in each of the upcoming training sections, we are going to go ahead and start to divide up and break down each of these 4 steps individually. Does that make sense? I hope so. And so these 4 steps make up what the daily management process is all about. But the question is, hey, what is this daily management process? This process of the daily management is something that we do daily, hence the name daily management process, right? And so what happens here is that this is what we are doing on a daily basis in order to properly manage our ongoing ads to make sure that we are actually profitable on the acquisition and making sure that we're keeping an eye on our acquisition and profitability metrics. Now, why is this important? And we're going to talk more about this later on inside of this training as well, is that when you're basically running ads, you have this tap on, right? So imagine you had like a sink with like water that's just running, right? So you have this tap on in your business, which is the ad spend, which is this tap right here. And then obviously you have the flow that's coming through in terms of the leads that are coming through, right? And so what that means is that money is being spent every single day in your business when and if you are actually running ads. And so in the beginning, as a beginner who is somebody who is just getting started in this game of paid advertising, you want to make sure that you are always capitalizing on the money that is being spent. Now, later on down the road, as you get more and more as a professional online entrepreneur, yes, it does get easier because of the fact that there are many more systems that we can actually tap into. There are many more automations that we can actually go ahead and maximize, so that way we can really squeeze everything we can out of that ad spend. And all of that is really because of the fact that you have now developed the skills and the identity to be an even better marketer, to be an even better media buyer, to be an even better advertiser when it comes to paid traffic. So all of these are going to be systems and automations and team and infrastructure that are going to become easier and easier and easier. However, when you are in the beginning stages, right, which is what you are right now, when you are a beginner, you must be deliberate and conscious throughout this entire process, because you probably launched ads, or you're probably about to launch ads, or whatever it might be, but you have to be extremely meticulous about this, because your skills right now are not that good and your identity around this is not that good either. And so you need to become somebody who actually takes their ad spend extremely seriously. Now, eventually you are going to get to the point where you are unconsciously competent and you know exactly what needs to happen when you have ad spend running, so you can literally do it in your sleep. Hey, I got to go ahead and do the daily reporting, I got to track my profitability, I got to do my daily judgment, I got to do my consistent ad work. You literally do it in your sleep and you're able to do it ongoingly forever, right? However, because in the beginning, right, you're going from conscious incompetence, you're like, dang, I didn't even realize how bad I was at this because I didn't even know that this stuff existed. But now you have to be extremely, extremely conscious to make sure that you are doing these things competently. Now, of course, with enough reps, with enough identity work, with enough all of that, obviously you're going to get to the point where it does become easier. But that's why we're emphasizing this right now, is because once we actually get into the daily management process, especially as a beginner, you need to make sure that you are actually being and doing these things extremely, extremely, extremely deliberately and actually paying attention to all of these things. And so that is why what we are talking about in this specific training when we talk about daily management is so important, because if you do not do these steps daily, right, daily reporting, tracking profitability, daily judgment, and consistent ad work, then you might as well just go down to the bank right now, withdraw a bunch of cash, go to your bathroom, light it on fire, and then flush that money down the toilet, okay? Literally, that is how important these 4 steps around daily management are, okay? Just because you launched ads, that's not really even the hard part, right? Like the pre-launch setup, that's like a one-time thing. Launching it is pretty straightforward, but the daily management for profitable acquisition, that is really what separates those who are actually successful with this process and those who are not, is through these daily management processes that we are going to go ahead and talk about, okay? So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into each of these 4 steps individually right now. And this has been this training section on the daily ads management kind of background, overview, explanation, XYZ. If you do have any questions about this section or anything we've discussed so far, make sure you go ahead and drop it in the student community. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump into the upcoming steps within the daily management process. We will catch you in the next training section. All right, team, welcome to step 1 of the daily management process, which is daily reporting. So just a quick recap, daily reporting is the first step. Then we got to talk about tracking profitability. Then we got to talk about daily judgment. And then we got to talk about consistent ad work. But first and foremost, we got to talk about the first step, which is daily reporting. So daily reporting is actually all about making sure that we are filling in our data daily in our master tracking sheet. That's what it's all about. However, even though it is pretty straightforward, because of the fact, like we talked about in previous training section, because you're a beginner to this, we need to make sure that we are extremely conscious and deliberate about the process of how this actually works, so you can start to develop good habits and better understandings around this, because you don't want to become unconsciously competent at bad habits of doing this stuff, right? And so that's the reason why we're going to go ahead and break down a couple very important questions when it comes to daily reporting. So we're going to break down 6 individual questions. Number 1 is going to be, why do we use the master tracking sheet? Why fill in the tracking sheet daily? When do we actually do the daily reporting? How long does it usually take? Whether or not we can just, turn off our ads whenever we want. And then, of course, why also it's going to be very important to take notes, okay? So those are going to be the 6 questions that we're going to go ahead and jump into, and then we will go ahead and get into a step-by-step of how to actually do this as well. So let's go ahead and get into question number 1, which is, why use the master tracking sheet in the first place? Like, why not just only use the ads platform, right? Like, why do we got to go through this kind of redundant process of actually copying and pasting from the ad platform the same exact data and then putting it into the tracking sheet, right? Like, why don't we just look at everything on the ads platform? And the reason for that, and we've talked about this in the past, but I'm going to dive into a little bit more deeper right now, is because the business intelligence sheet, that master tracking sheet, is not just an ads only tracking sheet, right? If we wanted to know the information that was the only ads data, well, we could get that only from the ads platform. Like, if we only wanted to know, how much was the ad spend, how much was the impressions, how many clicks all did we have, how many link clicks did we have, what was the CTR, the CPMs, like that kind of stuff. If we wanted to go ahead and cut off our acquisition machine right over here, sure, we could get all of this from the actual ad platform. But remember, there's an entire other piece to this entire acquisition machine, right? What happens in terms of your leads? Well, guess what? That's going to be inside of your CRM. What's going to happen in terms of your group members? Well, guess what? That's going to be inside of your Facebook group, right? What's going to happen on your lead nurture side? How many quick chats are you booking? How many outbound are you doing, right? What is the cost per strategy session? How many strategy sessions are you booking? What's your sales call percentage? How many units do you have? How much cash are you collecting? None of that is going to be inside of the ads platform. That is all going to be inside of the tracking sheet. And so the tracking sheet is like the glue that holds everything else together and basically takes all of these sources of information from different places, from the ad platform, from the CRM, from the Facebook group, from our calendar, from our payment processor. It puts it all into one place, which is the tracking sheet, okay? It allows us to be able to see the data across the entire business, whether that be front end, back end, value delivery systems, acquisition, data across everything, because of the fact that Meta, Facebook, YouTube, Google, ad platforms are not connected to CRM, Facebook, payment processor, accounting software. They don't know our expenses. They don't know any of that. And quite frankly, they already have too much information. We don't want to have to give them access to that, even if they were, right? But they're a social media company. They're not a data crunching company, right? And so for that reason, if we're going to be professional business owners, professional entrepreneurs, it is up to us in order to make sure that we are keeping our data and our metrics all organized so that way we can actually see all of the pieces and how they actually all work together, right? So we only care about how the ads are performing as long as it is within the context of the rest of the entire ecosystem, right? We've talked about this many times before, is that acquisition and truthfully business as a whole is systems that are working together. And so if we only pay attention to the lead generation metrics, then guess what? We're voiding all of the other information that is out there. And so that, ladies and gentlemen, is the reason why the master tracking sheet is so important and the reason why it is not redundant for us, even though we are copying some of that information from the ads platform in our daily reporting. Some of that other information is coming from other sources. So that's the reason why we need the master tracking sheet. Okay. So that is question number one. Gone ahead and answered there. Question number two is going to be, hey, why do we got to fill this in like daily? Like, why don't we actually go ahead and do this like every other day? Why not do this every week? Why not do this every other week? And it's a good question, right? But what you need to remember is that when you are running ads, is that you have a daily expense that is being taken out of your bank account, which is what? Your ad spend, right? And so imagine if you like accidentally left like the tap on with the water flowing in a tub or a sink, right? And you just let that go nonstop. And God forbid your tub was like, had the stopper in there and then your house would literally flood over, right? Or if you accidentally left on like a very high electricity usage appliance that was running nonstop, right? You'd probably have a massive bill at the end of the month, right? And so in fact, one of our coaches, they actually had a leak in their home where they literally had nonstop water running. And then without them knowing, by the end of the month, they had this massive bill and they literally put them into a tight financial position because of that, right? And so when we're running ads, it's not water or electricity that is being wasted, right? Or is being spent money on. It's literally real money directly. Imagine if you had a sink in which the tap water that was coming out was literal money. You'd probably keep a hawk's eye on it to make sure that, you never spent more than you actually wanted to, right? And so this is exactly what we're talking about when we talk about running ads. And so the question is, hey, why do we report on it daily, rain or shine, vacation or not? Why not every other day? Why not weekly? Why not every 2 weeks? The reason is because it's real money that is being spent every single day. And so if that's the case, it's probably a good idea to keep an eye on it, no? Right? Unless you have like so much money that you could not care about it at all. Even then, that would just be like, being silly because you're not keeping an eye on the money, right? So we cannot overstate and understate the importance of actually understanding this. Now, I understand that when somebody is a beginner, they're a newbie, they're an amateur, right? Even for us, honestly, like when we were beginners and we were just starting out in this thing, it was extremely hard for us because we were entrepreneurs, right? We just wanted to be entrepreneurs, but we were not entrepreneurs yet. And so we hadn't yet cultivated the identity of being professional entrepreneurs. And so it took us a time to develop the character trait of consistency in order for us to actually get into filling our tracking sheet every single day at around the same time without failing. And again, the reason is, and again, I'm being fully transparent here, is because we were either newbies and on some days we were entrepreneurs, right? We had not yet become professional entrepreneurs. We had not yet developed the skills and the identity that were required in order for us to be able to get the results that professional entrepreneurs got. And so when we actually committed down and said, hey, you know what? This is not just a skill that we got to develop, but quite frankly, we have to acquire the actual character traits of consistency, of resilience, of commitment, right? Because truthfully, like the skill aspect of actually filling in your tracking sheet is pretty straightforward. Like, yeah, you get the knowledge, you do it a bunch of times, it's pretty straightforward, right? But then it's very, very, very easy to not actually do it consistently. And that's the hard part. And truthfully, we lost thousands of dollars of wasted money because of the fact that we just had this tap that was running money without us even actually keeping an eye on it, right? And so it was only after we learned that the hard way that we actually made that mindset shift. We actually made the identity shift and committed to filling in the tracking sheet every single day, no matter what. And so this is a big warning for you, okay? Yes, you will be filling in the master tracking sheet daily when you have ads running, no matter what, okay? You do not want to make that mistake in which you have to learn the hard way, right? You want to learn from the mistakes of others so that way you do not have to repeat those mistakes over and over and over again, okay? And so this is the reason why I want to emphasize to you why it is so important to make sure that we are filling in the tracking sheet daily. And especially once you actually get into like things like the sales metrics and the outbound metrics and that kind of stuff later on in upcoming training sections. Right now, we're primarily focusing on ads and lead gen metrics and those kinds of things. But down the road, there's going to be data that like literally by the end of the day, you are the only one that has that data in your head. And if you don't write it down by tomorrow or the day after, you're going to forget, hey, how many calls actually showed up? You're not going to remember, right? Yeah, you're going to have to go and look at the recordings or something like that, but it's going to be very, very, very difficult. And so that's the reason why you have to start to develop this identity and these character traits around being able to be consistent and fill in the information consistently, because it is going to pay a massive amount of dividends for a very long period of time. And then on the back of that identity and character, you can then start to do like, hey, I'm going to start managing my cash flow regularly. I'm going to start looking at my expenses regularly. I'm going to start looking at these things daily, and you can actually track your net worth daily. And I'm going to tell you, when you track something daily, guess what happens, right? What gets measured gets treasured. What gets measured gets managed. And so these are one of the things that once you have this bedrock skill and identity in place, it's something that you can build on for many, 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 many other areas of your life as well. Okay. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that is question number 2, which is why fill in the tracking sheet daily. Question number 3 is, hey, when do we actually do the daily reporting? We've talked about this in the past when we talked about launching, which is that we always fill out on yesterday's data, right? So we wait for yesterday to close. So for example, right, if it's, let's say, for example, like, I don't know, March 14th, right? Let's say it's Thursday, March 14th. What we're going to do is we're going to wait for March 14th to close. And then on Friday, March 15th is when we're actually going to go in and fill in Thursday, March 14th's data, okay? So on Friday, we're going to fill in all of Thursday's data because we have to wait for that day to close, right? We can't actually report on Thursday's data if Thursday hasn't finished yet. And so this is the reason why we always do it the morning of the next day, and we are reporting on the entire previous day's worth of data. Now, when we get into the sales metrics, you'll see sometimes for sales, we might do it at the end of every day because, the day has ended. But specifically when we talk about ads, we're doing it the next day because, at nighttime, at like 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night, depending on Pacific, Standard, Eastern, whatever time zone, you could still have ad spend that is going out. And so you want to be able to catalog all of that properly. And so that's the reason why, for the purposes of lead generation, we fill this out the next day, the next morning, around the same time. Make sense? I hope so. That, ladies and gentlemen, is question number 3, which is when to actually do the reporting. Question number 4 is, how long does the reporting actually take? This is a pretty straightforward one. It shouldn't really take more than 5 to 10 minutes every single morning. That's it. And quite frankly, once you have set up all your bookmarks in your browser and you got your entire system dialed in and it kind of becomes a habit, literally it should not probably take more than 5 minutes. And once you have the skill dialed in, you can literally do it in your sleep. I am not joking. And the reason why this is important for you to do is because later on down the road, depending on your goals as an entrepreneur, you might have team members who are coming in and actually doing this, right? And so if you're having team members who are doing this, well, you got to be able to train them, right? Because if you don't actually inspect what you expect, if you don't actually know what the heck that person is supposed to be doing, it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to oversee them. And so once you can actually do this in your sleep, it's going to be very, very easy and effortless for you to be able to train somebody else to be able to do this for you down the road as well. But in terms of this question, how long does it take? Literally simple as that, 5 to 10 minutes, especially once you get all of your systems dialed in, okay? So with that being said, that is question number 4 done. Question number 5, so I can just turn off my ads whenever I want, right? Great question. Well, let's go ahead and talk about that, right? So for a lot of students who haven't yet developed the character trait of consistency, doing something every single day regularly causes them noise and tension, right? They're not able to do it effortlessly because their version 1.0 is fighting them because of the fact that it's just not a part of how they identify themselves, right? And so the question that oftentimes will come up is like, man, I got to do this like daily reporting thing every single day. It kind of stresses me out. Like, why don't I just turn off my ads like on the weekend so I don't got to worry about it? Or like, a holiday's coming up. Like, I don't want to fill in my data. Like, what's going on here? Like, I can just turn off my ads, right? We actually answered this question back in Judgment Day. And the rule we said was you never want to mess with a winner. Now, what does never messing with a winner have to do with just turning off your ads? Well, what we said is that you never want to edit once you have an ad set that is working and ads that are running well. You never want to mess with the budget, the copy, the creative, the headline, the targeting, or any other piece of the ad or the ad set. Now, the thing that we're adding to this is that this also includes the delivery of turning it on or off. And the reason we said that is because every small change that you make actually puts the ad and the ad set back into learning mode and actually increases the risk that the ad set's performance is going to decline, or you pretty much like sentenced it to death, okay? And so this includes turning it off or on. If you turn an ad set off and then you turn it back on, it is going to enter in probably back into learning mode. And then at that point, you have no idea and you're just praying that it actually performs like it used to. And there's a high chance that it may not actually perform the way that it used to. So it used to be a winner, but guess what? It now goes into being a loser. And that could be with the exact same ad, the exact same creative, the exact same copy, the exact same audience, because of the fact that the segment of the audience that the actual pixel targets may actually then change and it's no longer going to be a winner anymore, okay? And so this is the reason why that if you decide to turn your ads off for the weekend, then you are taking full responsibility if your ads don't perform the way that they used to when you turn them back on. Well, guess what? That's your fault, right? And so remember, back in launch day and judgment day, we worked so dang hard to find a winner. Imagine killing your golden goose, right? Imagine the thing that is feeding your business, you killed it, and then you have to go out now and find a new winner. It is a big, big, big pain in the butt. Now, the question that you might have then is like, okay, cool. Does that mean that I should never turn off my ads ever? Of course not. Now, there's legitimate reasons why you would need to turn an ad off, right? Like, for example, you have too much lead flow, which is a good problem to have. And you're like, you know what? I need less lead flow. So I'm going to turn off this ad. I'm going to turn off this ad set, something like that, right? That might be one legitimate reason. Or another legitimate reason is like, hey, you genuinely are closing down for a period of time in which you will not be able to utilize those leads, right? So typically like maybe around Christmas time, somewhere around there, right? Like, vacation time, winter break, whatever. We're taking like 2 or 3 weeks off. A lot of times we'll turn off ads with the mindset like, you know what? If we turn these ads back on come New Year, we know they might not function as well as they should, but we got some new angles, we got some new goals, we got some new audiences, all this stuff. We'll come back fresh and we'll launch it, right? But the point is that every single time you turn off your ads, you need to make sure that you are thinking through if you are okay with the ads performance not being as good as it was once you turn them back on, okay? Now, does that mean that there's 100% chance that once you turn off the ads and turn them back on that the ad performance is definitely not going to be the same? Yes and no. Technically, there is a chance that they could perform just as good, maybe even better. Hey, who knows, right? It's just a risk that you're taking. You're literally just gambling at that point, right? Because the ad set is going back into learning mode. But the point being here is that you do not want to take the chance or the risk that there is that probability that, hey, the ad isn't going to perform because of the fact that it isn't locked in to the audience the way that it used to be. And so you just want to recognize and understand that possibility and that risk. And so then the obvious question might end up being is like, cool, well, what do I do with this uncomfortable feeling that I have of I don't want to have to fill in this data every single day? Well, guess what? The solution to alleviating that feeling is that you're going to have to level up your identity and get better and develop the character trait of consistency and resilience, right? And commitment and grit. So that way you can do something every single day that doesn't cause you stress and tension any longer because of the fact that you've actually leveled up your identity, right? The feelings that you're feeling around that is because of your beliefs and your character traits that make up your identity around being able to do that regularly. Now, even if you hate it, maybe your business is not yet at the point in which you can offload that. Now, down the road, we'll walk you through how to be able to hire virtual assistants and team members and, people from across the world and be able to do all of that. That is a possibility and it's a skill that you can learn. However, if your business is not at that point yet, You're going to have to do that work in order to be able to get over that hump and get things started. And then down the road, you will be afforded those luxuries. So I hope that absolutely makes sense. And that is the answer to question number 5, which is, hey, can I just turn my ads off whenever I want? Well, hey, you got to understand the risks with that, right? And then question number 6 is why take notes, okay? So why take notes? We've said this before. Do you remember what you ate for breakfast last week? You probably don't. Humans have terrible memories. It has been proven time and time and time again. And unfortunately, one of the biggest mistakes that we see entrepreneurs, limbic lalus, beginners make, which is, oh yeah, I'll just remember it. And when in reality, you look at the most successful people in life, in all 4 areas of life, right? We know that they are obsessive around writing things down, around the data, around the KPIs, and around the taking notes. And yet, the most limbic lalu failure uniform people on the planet that we know in life rely on their memory. And so it's a very clear message here is that the winners understand that the weakest ink is better than the strongest memory. And so again, yes, we are going to give you the step-by-step, but we want you to be able to level up to being that winner, to becoming that professional entrepreneur, because we're able to open up those doors for you to think. But you have to recognize that, hey, if you don't create a system for yourself that works well for you to take notes, and everybody's system is going to be different and the tools they want to use are going to be different. But the point being is that you have to develop some sort of system, okay? Because this entire game of paid advertising is all about scientific experimentation. So that means that we are literally testing different variables based off of what we think. And if we don't write down what those variables are that we are testing, what our hypotheses are, what are our takeaways from this, we're not going to learn, we're not going to understand what needs to be tested, and it's not going to work. And so it's all about scientific experimentation. It's about taking the thinking time to decide, hey, what is the hypothesis that I want to test? What are the biggest needle breakers? What are the biggest needle movers that need to happen here in order for me to be able to get the results that I'm looking for in my business? So I really hope you get the point in terms of us really trying to force you to go ahead and think, so that way you are not somebody who says, you know what, okay, cool, I'm just going to remember things and I'm not going to take notes, and nobody taught me exactly what software to have to take notes on and exactly how to do it, so I'm not going to do it. No, you got to be resourceful, and you can go out there and create a system for you, because now the door has been opened in your mind to understand that, hey, this process of taking notes is going to be very important. Okay, so with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that is the answer to question number 6, as well as the answers to all of the important daily reporting questions. You may have some other questions regarding daily reporting. If you do, make sure you drop them in the student community so one of the community members can go ahead and help you. But with that being said, now that we have those questions out of the way, it is now time for us to go ahead and go into the actual step-by-step of daily reporting. Now, this is going to be extremely similar to how we did it back over in the launching training, but again, we're going to walk you through it so that way you can understand this as well. So with that being said, let's go ahead and cut over to a split screen that's going to walk you through the step-by-step for daily reporting in the daily management process. All right, welcome to this mini training that's going to walk you through the daily reporting step by step. So at this point, we've gone through this multiple times, and this was really by design. We wanted to make sure that, I know it can be a little bit overwhelming when you are first starting this, and that's the reason why we went ahead and really showed you this daily reporting process in multiple trainings over and over and over again, just in different contexts. And so we're going to go through it again one more time so that way you can really wrap your head around exactly what is going on here, because it is that important. So basically what you want to do is you want to make sure that you go ahead and bookmark a lot of these, because you're going to go ahead and use these on a regular basis. So in your normal workflow, you want to go ahead and bookmark, your Facebook ads account with your, proper tracking and everything correctly gone ahead and attributed on there. You want to have your CRM, the TCK, right? You want to have your Facebook group, your tracking sheet. All of that is properly bookmarked in your browser. So that way it makes it super easy and super effortless for you to be able to just open this up. And then just a pro tip, if you hold Shift on your keyboard or Command on your keyboard and then click, it'll actually open up a tab in the background. And so that is a good thing to do, right? And so you can obviously use, that star in order to bookmark and then save everything together. And there's plenty of tutorials on Google and YouTube that allow you to show you how to do that as well. Okay, so what we're going to do is we basically have our master tracking sheet here. Now on our master tracking sheet, ideally, you would have already gone ahead and bookmarked your exact month that is the active month right now, right? So let's say hypothetically, I'm going to go in right now and get into April. So I'm going to go ahead and open up April here. You'll see that I got some data on here as example test data. And now this is going to be the link that you want to make sure that you bookmark. So that way, this is the view that you immediately come to, which is the exact active month that you are in right now. Beautiful. So once you have that, and just for the sake of this example, I know all the dates are going to be wonky just as they have been so far in all these other mini trainings because of the fact that we got to pull data. We don't have, live, this is kind of example data. We don't have live data that we're pulling for you. So obviously what's going to look like on here. So we're going to go ahead and fill in the data. Let's say, for example, today is Saturday 4/8. Okay. So let's just imagine that it's 4/8/2023. When you might be going through this training, it might be, whatever date. It's not currently 4/8. It's actually a date in the past right now, but it might be 2025 when you're going through this training. I don't know, whatever year it might be. But just hypothetically, let's just imagine that today is Saturday 4/8. Okay, so it is the morning of Saturday 4/8, which is April 8th. And basically, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be filling in the information for the previous day, right? Because obviously Saturday 4/8 just started. It's 8 a.m. on Saturday 4/8. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in the data for Friday 4/7, okay? And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be filling in the data. I'm going to be filling in the ad spend, the impressions, the clicks all, the link clicks, okay? And then you see this black line over here that represents that over here. This data is going to come from the actual ads platform, okay? And then this leads data, this is going to come from our CRM. And then we're going to have our group members, which is going to come from our Facebook group, okay? So we have these lines over here to go ahead and annotate that from there. So we're going to go ahead and, of course, normally, again, we usually do this on a bigger screen. Obviously, because I am recording, it has to be on a singular screen. However, I would highly recommend that you have, either your split screen or your extra wide monitor, whatever, and you have this entire tracking sheet on one side, right? So tracking sheet here, and then you have these other tabs in a different window over here. So that way it has your, Facebook Ads Manager, and then it has your CRM, TCK, and then it has over here after that your Facebook group, right? And so that way it's very easy for you to then be able to just pull in and copy and paste that information. And so that way you don't have to switch tabs the way that I'm going to have to do inside of this tutorial. So we gone ahead and over here we have some example data again. I know the dates are all wonky. Don't worry, you are probably not going to have, filters and stuff like that. You're just going to go ahead and open up your ad account, and then you're going to go ahead and fill in, and you're going to go ahead and put the exact day as well, right? So in this case, we have, let's say November 14th is the exact day that we're on. So let's say, for example, I'm going to select the exact day, right? So I got to go over here. I'm going to put, let's say the 16th. So I'm going to double click on the 16th. So that way only the 16th is actually selected. I'm going to hit update. It's going to go ahead and show me all of the data for that specific day. And so that's where we're going to imagine that, hey, you know what, that's going to also be 4/7/23. And then once we have that, we're not going to be doing the local level, because remember, the local level, that's going to happen once we actually get into the daily judgment day in this entire process. We don't really care about the individual data here right now. What we really care about is, hey, what is going on the global level across all of the ad sets, across all of the ads, right? So in this case, on this specific day, we had spent $92.80. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And then I do Command C, Control C on the keyboard to copy. And then what you do over here is once you get over here, you're going to go ahead and then paste. And in order to paste, you can just right click, paste special, and then paste values only. You could do that. Or you could always do Command Shift V as well. And if you do Command Shift V, it'll actually paste with the actual formatting on here, right? So you see how this is like centered and all that? We want it to be with the formatting. Because if I go over here and I just Command C and then without preserving the formatting, I just Command V, you'll see it messes up. It's bold and it's a bigger font and it's a different text, all that kind of stuff, right? So instead, what we do is Command C over here, and then we come over here, we do Command Shift V. You'll see that it actually does preserve the formatting on there, okay? Then we're gonna go ahead and go back over to the ads platform. We're gonna go over to impressions. Of course, we wanna make sure that we have our right columns, because then ad spend, impressions, everything lines up very nicely. So same thing here, Command C. We're gonna go back over here. We're gonna go ahead and paste over here, Command Shift V on that, and you'll see right here, it goes ahead and puts the impressions on there. From there, we're gonna then go over to clicks all. So we're gonna go over here, scroll over to the right. We have 24. Now, if you wanna copy and paste it, you could. You could also just type it manually, because it's just a very easy number, 24. Links click is gonna be 10 on there. Okay, so I got 10 right here. And then right here, now we've crossed that black line, we gotta go over to our CRM, okay? So on our CRM side of things, again, I want you to imagine that these dates are all basically saying, 4/7 is what we're doing right now. So I want you to imagine that the date created on here is all 4/7, okay? Because I know it's not 4/7, but I want you to imagine that it is 4/7. Because then what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at all of the ones that were created on 4/7. Now, in this case, what we normally do is I do Command F on the keyboard, and then we'll go and type in, let's say, for example, May 02, right? Let's say hypothetically, let's say that was April, whatever date we're on, right? Or I could do, let's say November 02, and whatever date is the day that I'm filling in the data for, that is, whatever number that would be on here. So in this case, that would be a 5. And so I would come over here, I would put a 5 right there, and then I would go over to the Facebook group, and then I would go ahead and select the actual day. So I'd go over here, left side, growth, and then you go ahead and do custom, and then you select whatever is that date. So in this case, we would be selecting the date of 4/7. Again, I know the dates are all wonky and all janked up and messed up, but just run with us, right? So imagine that this is actually 4/7. In this case, it's March 27th. We're going to go down here. We're going to say, okay, how many did we approve? And then sometime down the road, maybe sometimes we'll also use declined, but that would be in a different column if we wanted to track the quality. But in this case, we're going to say, cool, how many group members were actually approved is what we're going to put over here, right? So in this case, it would be 7, just like that. And now, guess what? We've gone ahead and now actually reported our daily metrics for lead generation, right? So if you go over here, set up the columns, all that kind of stuff, obviously fill in the sheet. Now, the other thing I'm going to go ahead and mention, and we'll talk about this in other data and KPIs trainings. Obviously, we have our setter metrics here. Then we got our sales metrics here. We'll talk about kind of the best practices around when to put in this data, right? Obviously, going in and putting your cash data in, that's going to be very important on a regular basis, but that will be in a different module in which you talk about sales data and KPIs and filling in your tracking and all of that kind of stuff. However, I will go ahead and mention over here, if we go all the way to the right, and again, if you hold shift on the keyboard and then use your mouse wheel in order to scroll all the way to the right, you will see that at the very end of the master tracking sheet, there is an expenses section, okay? So normally in the morning, it is a very good opportunity to go in and actually put in expenses as well. So you would actually have another tab open here, and you'd have your bank account, your business bank account or whatever, and you want to go ahead and see, hey, do I have any business expenses here? Not personal expenses, business expenses. Okay, now you see that there is a formula on here that already goes ahead and pulls in the marketing ad spend for that specific previous day, right? So you could go ahead and have that automatically populated here. But if you had any other expenses, right? Again, these are just some example categories that are very common in accounting, right? So it may be any coaching expenses you add, any software expenses, office supplies, that kind of stuff. So you can go ahead and fill that in as you go in and do that on a daily basis. So that way, once you actually get to tracking profitability and not only looking at profitability on the lead gen and ad section, but you can also then look at profitability across the entire company, right? So you can say, okay, these are my total expenses. And if I scroll down here to the bottom, which you're going to learn about later on to zoom out when we talk about tracking profitability, you can actually see, hey, what is my gross profit for the month? What is my gross margin looking like? And that is only going to happen if you are actually filling in your expenses on a daily basis from your actual bank statement in your bank account. And remember, these are business expenses, so you can see your gross margin in the business. So again, I just wanted to show you that. I know it's not inside specifically. I know we say fill in your expenses here, but it's not something we went in the main training, but we just want to kind of, sprinkle that in, plant those seeds for that. And then obviously you can go ahead and observe if you really wanted to here, kind of just see, okay, hey, what's going on here? If I'm looking for any anomalies that might be happening. So for example, my CPM jumped from, 42 to 61 in one specific day. But again, we don't want to, put too much stock or too much emphasis on one day's worth of data because of the fact that, it can fluctuate absolutely. But we're just noticing these things as we go along, right? We're not making any changes right now. We're just kind of daily reporting right now, looking at what's going on here. And obviously in this case, this was just example data. So that's the reason why there's probably a big jump there, because it was completely different ad accounts that we previously filled in this example data from. But just giving you an example there, right? Looking at our CTR all, our CTR link click, our leads, looking at our leads to group number. But you see on here, like this number over here is 140%. And so that means that we got 5 leads and we have 7 people join the group. And this is normal, right? Because you have your text message campaigns and your email campaigns going on. So you might have certain days where you have more group members than the number of leads that you actually got that day. And that's completely normal. And that's the reason why we really look at the average overall is what we're looking at, right? And then whenever you see things that, for example, like in this case, this is supposed to be a percentage, but in this case, it's a dollar sign. And so in this case, what we would do is we would just go ahead and hit that column, and then we would go over to format. We would go over here to number, and then we would go down over here to percent, and then that would go ahead and format that as a percent. So these things happen sometimes, sometimes you don't Command Shift V properly, sometimes, XYZ happens, but it's normal to see that. So I just wanted to show you what that looks like. So in this case, look at this, we got 550 leads for the month so far. We got 444 group members. That means we have an 80% lead to group member percentage. And then that means that we have, it's supposed to be above 70% of the KPI on there, right? So we can see that very easily all in the master tracking sheet. So these are small things that you're kind of just paying attention to as you go along along on the lead gen metrics. And obviously, as you're filling in some of these other metrics, you're paying attention to those as well. But I just wanted to touch on those finer nuances and pro tips here in the daily reporting step by step. And then obviously down the road, as we now go into tracking profitability and looking at some of the other metrics that we go along here, we're going to zoom out and we are going to go ahead and look a lot more on these KPIs and look at the pieces within this entire acquisition machine. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the step-by-step daily reporting. We're going to go ahead and cut back over to the main training. All right, welcome back from that step-by-step around the daily reporting. It's going to be very important for you to be able to understand how that entire process works, as well as it's going to be important for you to understand the coach's warning here, okay? Because I'm going to make it very clear for you. If you are in the coaching program and you ask for help from either of, a community member or your coach or whatever that might look like, the very first question that you are going to be asked is, hey, what are your numbers? Where's your tracking sheet? What is your data, right? And at this point, you are not a new student, right? We have talked about the importance of tracking and what all of that looks like in extreme detail, okay? And so you have to understand that without having your numbers ready, because you haven't filled in your tracking sheet on a daily, regular basis, right? There's literally nothing that anyone can do to help you, because there's even nothing that you can do to help yourself. Because the thing is that having the data and the numbers and the tracking sheet is critical as a first step in order for you to even have an idea of like, hey, where the heck am I? And what is the actual problem that I'm even looking to solve, right? It's literally the difference between flying blind versus having a map to where you want to go. And so this is a warning from right now that if you are not achieving your goals and you're not making progress towards where your goals want to be, the question is, are you tracking the metrics and then adjusting your behavior to the KPIs that need to happen in order for you to be able to hit those metrics? If you are not hitting that, whether that be a health goal, a wealth goal, a relationship goal, a connection to something greater goal, a personal goal, a physical goal, right? A professional goal, doesn't matter what it is. My question to you is going to be, what is the metrics you need to track? And how do you know you're actually being successful, aka KPIs, right? And so you do not have permission to ask for help if you yourself have not actually done the dang work to actually fill in your tracking sheet every single day, okay? So without the daily reporting, you are not able to receive help from anyone, including yourself, period. And so I just want to go ahead and provide that warning and make that extremely clear for you around the importance of tracking your information. So that way you understand like, hey, filling this sheet in daily is literally the first step, not only for me to be able to help myself, because if I don't have the data, if I can't average the data out, because a lot of people are like, oh, I have a day's worth of data. I have like 2 days worth of data. You need multiple days of data to be able to look at the average. And we've talked about this in previous trainings as well when we talk about data and KPIs and metrics in terms of just one data point. It's about averages of the data points in order to actually understand what the heck is going on, okay? And so that's the reason why you got to make sure that you are filling it in every single day. So daily reporting, let's go ahead and bring it all together inside of this training section. We've gone ahead and talked about the first step of the daily management process, which is daily reporting. When you have your ads running, you need to make sure that every single day you are doing the daily reporting. We went ahead and also answered a whole bunch of the important questions when it comes to daily reporting, as well as we went ahead and talked about the actual step-by-step of what that actually looks like. So next up, what we're going to go ahead and do is we are going to go ahead and get into tracking profitability as the next piece of the daily management process. So ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, this was step 1 of the daily management process, which was daily reporting. If you do have any questions about this section or anything that was discussed, make sure you go ahead and ask it inside of the student community, so that way one of the community members can go ahead and help you. But hey, we are not done yet. We're going to go ahead and continue on this journey. With this being said, we will catch you in the next training section. Hey team, welcome to this training section that is going to go ahead and go over step number 2, which is tracking profitability. I hope you are ready and I hope you are strapped in and buckled up, because this is going to be a meaty training section, which will really dive into profitability metrics and understanding the difference between acquisition metrics and profitability metrics and how to be able to utilize all of these together. So let's go ahead and get into the introduction of this and then get into the meat and potatoes of this training. So again, inside of this training section, we are going over step 2 of the daily management process, which is tracking profitability. Now, before we actually get into the meat and potatoes of this, there are 4 foundational points that we need to go ahead and cover, so that way I can provide you context, so that way you understand exactly what we're talking about here, okay? Number 1, where exactly are we going to be tracking profitability in this entire process? How does this work? Do I do my daily reporting and then do my tracking profitability right after that? Let's talk about that. Number 2, hey, do I evaluate my ads performance first, or do I track my profitability first? I'll talk to you about that as well. Number 3, hey, why is it even important to track my profitability metrics and KPIs? We'll talk about that. And then we got to go over a warning. Once we get over these 4 foundational points, we can then get into the meat and potatoes of this training and actually go over the profitability metrics. Okay, so let's get into point number 1, which is when am I actually going to track profitability? So every day after you have actually done your daily reporting, which will take a couple minutes, right? What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and step back. We're going to go ahead and zoom out. We're going to go ahead and get our head above the water, get our head above the clouds, and we're going to say, cool, let's go ahead and see how is the whole business doing as a whole. We're going to evaluate the profitability. We're going to evaluate the acquisition. Now, how do we do that? Guess what? That's exactly what you're going to learn inside of this training section, right? And so when we talked about the acquisition training previously, that's what we're talking about. When we say tracking profitability, tracking acquisition, all of that, right? This is a part of that daily management process. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be evaluating the acquisition metrics as well as the profitability metrics, which you're going to learn about inside of this training section in just a little bit. And what we're doing pretty much every single day is we're keeping a pulse on, okay, I spent this much on ads yesterday. How are the numbers looking? How is the entire acquisition system looking like? And what we are doing is we're zooming out to see, hey, what are the inputs? What are the outputs? How are the outputs performing? What is the efficiency of those outputs? That is what we are doing on a daily, regular basis by getting our head above the water. So that way we're not stuck in the trenches and we can actually see, hey, cool, I spent, $100 yesterday on ads. What is the downstream effect of that $100? Am I setting myself up into a place in which I am going to be able to capitalize on that $100 that I invested? Or am I not actually putting in the work? Am I not actually putting in the behaviors and the systems in place in order to actually be able to make a return on investment of that? That is the piece in which tracking profitability actually takes place. Okay, so that is point number 1 I wanted to go ahead and talk to you about, which is, hey, when am I actually going to track profitability, right? Point number 2 is evaluating ads performance or tracking profitability, right? It's like, okay, cool. Well, when I actually am doing this process, am I going in and actually evaluating like what's going on the ads level? Like, am I going into the ads manager and doing that? Or am I just looking at like the tracking sheet? Like, how is all this actually going to come together, right? So what's going to happen is that later on in an upcoming training section, we are going to get into the actual like daily judgment piece, right? And the daily judgment piece is going to be where we actually go into the ads manager and see like, okay, this specific ad set, this specific ad, XYZ, right? We're going to look at each and every single one inside of the ad set. However, when we are talking about the tracking profitability step, which is what this entire training section is about, what we are doing inside of this specific training section is we are first evaluating the profitability by looking at our tracking sheet. We are looking at the acquisition metrics. And all of this, everything that we're talking about inside this training section is primarily happening inside of the tracking sheet so we can actually look at the overall metrics, okay? And the reason why we are first evaluating our profitability before we actually go in and optimize our ads in Daily Judgment Day, right? Like, why the heck are we doing this first instead of this? Like, why shouldn't we go in and optimize the ads first? Why are we doing this side first by looking at the tracking sheet? And the reason for that is because, like we talked about in the actual acquisition training, is that ultimately what we care about in business is not just the lead generation metrics, okay? So when we actually look at the daily judgment piece of this, this is us now going in and doing judgment day for the actual like lead gen metrics, like looking at the, hey, how's the ad performing? How's the ad set performing? How's the creative? How's the copy? How's the targeting? All that stuff, right? However, when we're doing tracking profitability, what we are forcing ourselves to look at is the global view of not only just the lead gen metrics, but the entire piece as a whole. And we've talked about this many times. We do not pay our bills or put food on the table with things like impressions or clicks or leads or group members or any of those lead gen metrics. We pay our bills and put food on the table based off of actual customers and actual cash collected. And then based off of that, that is the reason why we are prioritizing looking at and tracking profitability before we even look at the actual ads themselves, because we want to look at the global level to see if the inputs and the outputs are performing the way that we want them to. And so by doing this, this is giving us kind of like a zoomed out view of the entire system by being able to look at that master tracking sheet across the entire business. And then only after we have done that tracking profitability by zooming out, do we now have a good sense of the entire acquisition system? And now we can actually zoom into the trees, we can actually zoom into the trenches, and then look at the individual parts and say, hey, is the ad performing how it should? Hey, is the landing page performing how it should? Hey, is the community nurturing as it should? Hey, is the sales call performing actually the way that it should be, right? This is all that we're able to do. But first we're looking at acquisition metrics, profitability metrics. Then we zoom in and say, cool, how are the individual pieces performing? And then after all of that, do we then then zoom in to the actual ads manager and then do daily judgment from there, right? So then after that, we can then really zoom in and really get in the trenches and look at all of the individual ads and the individual ad sets that are within there. However, we want to make sure that we go ahead and do tracking profitability. We go ahead and get that zoomed out view. We go ahead and see, okay, hey, what are the inputs looking like? What are the outputs looking like? How are each of the pieces individually kind of performing as well? And then we zoom in and look at what are the ads looking like from there, okay? And so it's like having the ability to zoom in and zoom out to different parts of the money machine according to how we want to be able to kind of set our mindset to be able to think properly and make proper decisions, right? So we're kind of like able to zoom in and say, cool, we're going to zoom out first and look at the entire company as a whole. And then we're going to slightly zoom in, right? Just increase the zoom to like, instead of it being like 50% zoom, we're going to go ahead and make it like 100% zoom. We're going to go ahead and zoom in like a little bit over here. Like, let's look at some of these parts, right? And then we're going to go ahead and zoom in like 200%. And we're going to look at like, hey, show me only the ads piece inside of the ads manager. That is what this kind of mindset of being able to be that entrepreneur who can have that kind of like, hey, head above the clouds, looking at everything, seeing how everything is running, identify what the target is, and then boom, zoom in, right? As that bird goes into the trees and then gets in the trenches, puts in the work, gets in the game, gets in the arena, and actually puts in the work to see what's going on there, right? So you got to be able to cultivate that shift between the zoom in and the zoom out that is required in order to be successful with this entire game as well. Okay, so that, ladies and gentlemen, is foundational point number 2 that we want to go over, which is, hey, do I evaluate my ads performance first or do I track profitability? We've already talked about that. We said that ads performance is going to be something that you do in the upcoming section when we talk about daily judgment. Specifically in this training section, we're talking about tracking profitability. And that is what we're doing when we are actually zooming out and seeing all of that, okay? Foundational point number 3 is just why track metrics and KPI. So, when you go to the doctor's office, they take like a whole bunch of blood reports and that kind of stuff, right? They say, hey, what are your current weight numbers? Like, how much do you weigh right now? What's your blood pressure? What is your glucose numbers? What are your lipid cholesterol numbers, right? All these metrics that they are actually tracking, right? These are what they will count as your count metrics. Now, along with that, there are then KPIs that will determine whether or not you are in the healthy ranges based on your age, gender, and other factors based on that, right? They say, okay, cool. Hey, what are your weight numbers? Your BMI should be, let's say, under 20, right? Your blood pressure should be, expectation, KPI is 120 over 80, right? What are your glucose numbers? Hey, somewhere between 70 and 100 milligrams per deciliter. They shouldn't be more than that. If they're more than that, we got a problem, right? You're not healthy, right? What are your lipid cholesterol numbers? Well, your LDL should be typically under like 100 milligrams per deciliter, right? Your triglycerides under 150 milligrams per deciliter. Your HDL somewhere between 40 and 60 milligrams per deciliter, right? So these are the KPIs that are being tracked. So we're tracking the metrics, the count metrics, and then we have the KPIs to evaluate those metrics. Why do they do that? To determine the overall health of your physical body. It makes sense, right? And so in the same way, we have metrics and KPIs to assess the overall health of your money machine, right? So it's like, hey, what are your current acquisition costs? Your CAC should be 16.7% of your expected average contract value. Don't worry, we're going to get into the KPIs later on, right? What's your current return on ad spend upfront? Should be da-da-da-da. What is your current return on ad spend? Total cash. Should be da-da-da-da. What is your total cash every single month compared to the ad spend? Should be da-da-da-da, right? And so there's count metrics, and then there are KPIs for which we are actually going ahead and calculating and making sure that your business and your money machine is actually healthy. Now, in the same way that there are different systems within your body, right? So you have a system, for example, you have like your heart, cardiovascular system, right? And then you have your digestion system. And then after that, you have your other system, right? You have your muscular system and then your skeletal system. And there are different KPIs that make up the entire body as a whole, right? So if you have body, here's my kind of body over here, right? Yeah, I'm not the best artist over here, but you get the point, right? So in the same way that you got this guy over here, this girl, or, this ungendered figure over here, right? It's made up of multiple different systems that are going on over here, right? And so what we got to do is we got to see, okay, based off of the different metrics within each of the individual systems, we then zoom out to see, hey, what is the overall health, and then what are the specific systems that need help with, right? And so that's exactly what we're doing with business as well. Business is just systems that are working together. We zoom out to see the overall health of the system, and then we can zoom in and then optimize and make better each of the individual systems from there as well. And so it's the exact same concept with every single profession that you look at, right? Every single focus has its own metrics compared to its KPIs to look at the health of it. Now, unfortunately, this isn't where most most people who are just entrepreneurs or just getting started in entrepreneurship, they don't understand that this entire game is extremely scientific, extremely precise, extremely quantifiable. And so in order to become that professional that can get the results that are necessary, obviously it's going to be important for you to have your eyes open to this fact. And that's exactly what we're talking about here when we talk about acquisition and profitability of your business, is that point right there, which is like, hey, your body has systems, and you got to look at the overall health of your body via these metrics and these KPIs. We're doing the same thing with your business as well. Beautiful. With that being said, that is going to be foundational topic point number 3. And then the final point that we have before we actually jump into the meat and potatoes of this specific training is a big warning. And that warning is that, hey, this is probably what we're about to go talk about right now. Is probably going to go over your head initially the first time you go through this. Why? Because depending on where you are in your journey right now as an online entrepreneur, you may not even have enough data and enough traction in your business to actually even track profitability, right? Right now, you might only be able to do basic tracking of profitability inside of your business, right? You might only have something like, hey, ad spend, impressions, clicks. You might not even have any calls booked yet. You might not have any units that you've closed yet, all of that stuff, right? And so that's what we say basic profitability. And so later on inside of this training section, when we actually dive into, we're going to talk more about the acquisition metrics and how they play into profitability metrics, because we did say that this is going to be a meaty, beefy training. Once we actually talk about all of that coming together, you may not fully be able to utilize all of these metrics at the most advanced level right now. And so you might only be able to utilize them at a basic level, primarily because of the fact that you do not even yet have all of that put together just yet in your business, right? And so the question then is, hey, what the heck? I'm barely running my ads right now, coaches, right? I'm barely getting there. We're talking about the profitability of the entire business. Yep. And so there's a reason we say that a good chunk of this training might feel extremely theoretical for you right now, or more theoretical than practical for you. And that is okay. Now, the question that might come up is, okay, so does that mean that I should just go ahead and skip this training, or should I come back to it later on, or what's going on? Great question, right? Yes, we do require for you to go through this training right now, especially if this is the first time you're doing it. Yes, it's okay that you are going to feel like this. And yes, it's okay that it is going to seem a little bit kind of hypothetical, a little bit abstract and that kind of stuff. It's okay. It's still a requirement for you to go through this training, because going through this training is going to allow you, especially in your early stages as you're doing this, to plant those seeds and prime those neurons and get that RAS, remember that reticular activating system, ready, so that way you can see the full picture. So that way when you do come across the terms and metrics that we're going to talk about inside of this specific training, you can say, oh yeah, I remember learning about that. And it's going to make a lot more sense to you at that point. And then the beautiful thing about it, you'll know exactly where to come back to in this exact training, and you'll be able to come back to it over and over and over again. So that way you can actually start filling in your lead nurture metrics and your sales metrics and all those other data and KPIs that you're going to learn about later on down the entire process. And this training is going to become absolutely gold for you, because of the fact that now that you've gone through it one time, you'll see, okay, hey, I knew that I didn't have yet lead nurture metrics. I knew that I didn't have yet sales metrics. I knew that I didn't have yet profitability metrics to be able to do. I only really had like lead generation metrics that I was initially looking at. But now I know that, hey, this process right here, tracking profitability, initially is just cool. I spend $100 in ads. I got nothing else to show for it right now. That's going to be the basic level of tracking profitability. But then as you get more and more of that data pushing downstream over here, you're then able to go ahead and look at some of those other acquisition metrics. You're able to look at some of those other profitability metrics and do this as a part of your daily management flow. And it's going to become extremely valuable for you to then revisit this training over and over and over again. Okay. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, now that we've talked about planting seeds and all of the foundational topics and all of that, my question to you is, are you ready to jump in? Are you ready to go ahead and prime that mind? Are you ready to go ahead and plant those seeds that's going to be all about acquisition and profitability metrics? Because now we've gone ahead and talked about all of the 4 foundational points. The only thing that is left now is for us to actually just jump right into it. So let's go ahead and do that right now. And let's go ahead and start off this process by talking about the difference between acquisition versus profitability metrics. And so in this section, we're going to talk about profitability metrics, but wait a second. Are profitability metrics like different from acquisition metrics? The answer is yes, they are, but they do work hand in hand. Okay, so this is going to be a visual that we refer to quite often, and we're going to talk about the profitability metrics inside of this entire training section. But the question is not hey, is it acquisition versus profitability metrics? It's acquisition and profitability metrics. Okay, so when it comes to step 2 of the daily management process, and we're saying, hey, tracking profitability, we are going to be looking at both sets of metrics to really get a full picture of what is going on in the entire machine, both on the acquisition side. Okay, so yes, we got the acquisition systems here. We're looking at the acquisition side, but really overall, looking at yes, we're looking at the acquisition side, but also what's happening on the profitability side throughout the entire business. It's going to be very important for us to be able to utilize both of them together. So again, let's go ahead and talk about exactly what those profitability metrics are. So profitability, right, if we can say it properly, profitability metrics allows us to look at the overall picture of what is going on in the finances of the entire business on the back end of the business. Now, wait a second, coaches. I thought we didn't have a back end to our business, right? Remember we talked about how multiple products, don't have multiple products, you got to have one product. You don't really have a traditional back end with multiple products and all that kind of stuff. So technically, even though you do not have a back end with multiple products because there's the rule of one that exists, right? You do actually have a back end to the business when it comes to finances. Let us explain, okay? Here's an example. Let's say, for example, you sell a $2,400 contract value program. Now, you may have, as you're going to learn in the sales module, you may have some students who do a paid in full, right? A PIF. And a PIF, a paid in full, is like, cool. They just pay the contract value straight up, $2,400 paid in full right there. That may exist. However, most often you are going to get customers who are going to do split payments. And so a customer, let's say, for example, is going to do this $2,400 contract value program, but they're going to do a 3-pay. A 3-pay, as you're going to learn some of the verbiage later on when we talk about it, a 3-pay is basically where they're going to split that contract up into 3 equal payments. And so the customer is going to potentially pay $800 of that $2,400 upfront. So let's say, for example, the call and the sales call and the strategy session, everything happens on March 15th, okay? You collect that $800 and you get them access to the program, you get them started, okay? That is month number 1. And now what has happened is that there are $1,600 left on their contract, because remember, $2,400 was their total contract, and then we have $800 of that has already been paid, so there's $1,600 left. Now what's going to happen is that on April 15th, which is 1 month after, right, March, April, 1 month after their original signing date, they are going to have a split payment that is going to go through, that is automatically going to be charged on their card for another $800, okay? So now what's left on their contract is just $800. So they've paid $1,600 now, right? 2 payments of $800, and they have 1 payment of $800 left. Then on May 15th, which is now the 3rd month, right? March, April, May, they're going to have their final split payment come through for $800, right? It's going to be automatically charged through, because we have the card on file, all that kind of stuff. And so over the course of 3 months, they have now gone ahead and paid off their entire $2,400 contract value. Is that making sense so far? And so in this way, technically, even though you only have one product, right? From a product standpoint, yes, you only have one fulfillment, right? We don't have multiple fulfillments that are going on here, right? What's happening here is you kind of have like ongoing fulfillment, like a 3-month program. And so as a result, you're getting these split payments via unpaid upcoming projected contract amounts. Does that make sense? And so as a result, it's kind of like you have a back end recurring, not 100% because it's not like a recurring product, or it's not like a multiple products that you're selling them, but it's like split payments, which is known as accounts receivable, that you're going to learn more about later on, right? And so even though we don't have quote unquote like a resale and ascension process that we are doing through the customers, what we are doing is we are making sure to keep the customer engaged in their existing program, so that way they do not default. This is the term that we use. They do not default on their contract and say, you know what, I paid $800 for 1 month. I'm not going to, this person that my coach left me, I don't know what the heck's going on. I don't like this program. I'm going to default. I'm just going to ghost, and that's it. And now obviously you have a legal agreement in place, but legal agreements are only binding so much that you're willing to pursue them. And a lot of times it's not worth pursuing it, right? And so what that means is that you still need to make sure that you are keeping your customers activated throughout your fulfillment system to make sure that you can actually collect on those upcoming months, right? And so even within your quote unquote one product on your front end, even though you don't have all these other back-end products, you're still keeping them activated in their fulfillment process, so that way you can collect on the back-end accounts receivable cash. And so in this way, okay, in this way that you now have just understood, you kind of do have a resale and ascension that is going on, that is built in within your fulfillment system. And so this is what we mean when we say that profitability metrics allow us to see how profitable the business is, not only on the front end upfront, right? Because that's what the acquisition metrics allow us to see that we've talked about. The acquisition metrics allow us to see, hey, the upfront front end, But the profitability metrics, when we put those in place with them, right? So both of them together, we're able to get a picture of the overall, both the front end and the back end split payment, cash, and contract that is coming in. And so that's the reason why when we go ahead and define it, you'll see some of these that we have is split payments, total contract, total cash collected, contract ROAS, total cash ROAS, ad spend to cash. These are some of the profitability metrics that we will be talking about. And so this is the reason why both acquisition, because this gives us an idea of the front end upfront, and the profitability metrics have to work hand in hand. It just depends on what part of the business that we are zooming in and zooming out of, right? And so the metrics, the same way, like your blood pressure tells you something about your body, right? Your, muscular mass tells you something about your body, right? Different systems in your body, different metrics and different KPIs will tell us different things around the business. And so if we're zooming in and looking at acquisition on the front end, cool, we look at acquisition metrics. If we're zooming out and we're looking at the profitability of the whole business, including back-end split payment cash that's coming in, then we look at the profitability metrics, okay? And so if we wanted to see how everything was doing together, we would look at both of them together to get an accurate health pulse on what the actual business looks like. I hope that makes sense. Beautiful. Having said that, now what we got to do is we actually got to define like, hey, what are these profitability metrics? Now, I know we've talked about the visual of them, like I showed you the visual of them, but let's actually go ahead and actually talk about what these profitability metrics are, right? And we've talked about, hey, the reason why it's important to define these terms and these metrics is because as you learned later on, we talked about, before we talked about the acquisition metrics, we said like CPA, cost per action. Very confusing depending on the context, depending on the industry. All of it has different meanings, right? And so it's very important for us to go ahead and actually define this so we can say, hey, when we say profitability metrics, well, what the heck are the actual profitability metrics? Now, just a prereq warning, this is all going to be inside of the cheat sheet as well as what we have built on in all of the other trainings, right? We talked about the actual data and KPIs training. We talked about the profitable acquisition training. All of this is going to be built on that. And so if you haven't gone through that, you want to make sure that you go through that first, okay? So what are the metrics that are needed for profitability? Similar to acquisition, we've gone ahead and kind of used a similar system here where there are 6 of them. So profitability metric number 1 is going to be split payments. Number 2 is going to be total contract, then total cash collected, then contract ROAS, then total cash ROAS, then ad spend to cash. And then in the same way that we did acquisition metrics, we are then going to go ahead and divide this up into 2 categories. We have count metrics, and then we have calculated metrics, okay? So count metrics are going to be, hey, it is what it is, right? Hey, how much split payments did you actually collect this month? Hey, what was your actual total contract this month? Hey, how much total cash did you collect this month, right? And then we have our calculated metrics, which is going to be our contract ROAS, our total cash ROAS, our ad spend to cash. Now, I also want to note that there are other profitability metrics, like if we're talking about gross margin, net operating income, those kinds of things, right? Overall accounting profitability metrics. But what we're talking about here is specifically kind of like lead gen ads profitability metrics is what we're kind of gauging here, and the kind of cash collected, cash profitability. And then down the road, once we get into operations and finance and accounting and that kind of stuff, there's more advanced metrics that we can talk about when it comes to profitability, but we're going to primarily focus on these 6 for right now. Now, the other very big and important piece to this is that we do not want to get confused with the acquisition metrics that we talked about, okay? So that's the reason why we went ahead and created this different diagram. Let me go ahead and make it a little bit bigger for you so you could see, is that we did go ahead and create this diagram in which it is color-coded differently, in which acquisition metrics are orange here on the left side, and then profitability metrics are green there on the right side. So even though there are kind of like, hey, 6 and 6 and count and count, these are kind of acquisition count metrics, these are profitability count metrics, and then we have the calculated metrics based off of that, but they are telling us different metrics and different KPIs for different things, okay? Now, take a deep breath, stick with me here for a second. The question is, how in the world is all of this going to come together? Don't worry, we're going to show you exactly where all of this is in the master tracking sheet. And the question also might come up is like, hey, when will all of this stop being so theoretical for me? So remember, like we talked about earlier, depending on where you are in your journey, you may be in the initial stages where you only have maybe ads launched, maybe you don't even have your ads launched yet, you're kind of just going through this for the first time around to plant the seeds. Well, that's okay, because as you go deeper and deeper into this and you slowly, let's say you have your ads launched, then you got some group members, then you got some outbound going on, then you got some sales coming in, or you got some sales calls being booked, maybe no sales coming in yet, then you got some units. So over time, as you get more and more of those metrics, as you start filling in things like number of units, upfront cash, total amounts, all of that, contract values, that kind of stuff, then it's going to stop being theoretical, and all of these metrics are actually going to mean something to you at that point. And you're going to come back and back and back and back and back to this training over and over and over again. And you're going to be so happy that we put this training together, because it's all going to just click and just make sense to you at that point. However, Right now, I totally understand that this may be completely theoretical and just kind of high level 30,000 for overview. And so yes, it is going to feel a little bit like this right now, right? And you will feel like, where the heck am I right now? This feels like I'm doing some kind of like, I'm floating in space and doing like calculus, differential equations, rocket science right now. It's okay. Stick with us. And then over time, as this becomes more and more practical for you, it will go ahead and make more and more sense. Okay. So with that being said, we are going to go in and actually define each of these profitability metrics, just like we did for the acquisition metrics way back when. And so we are going to go ahead and actually dive into them, each of the count metrics and then each of the calculated metrics. We're going to go through it a little bit quicker because now you kind of get the speed of it. And if I go too fast, obviously we have the guide that you will be able to come back and revisit this and probably study it over and over and over again. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the first profitability metric, which is going to be split payments. So we've already talked a little bit about split payments inside of this training section, but like we said, split payments is how much we collect in payments from those that were contracts that were split up. Okay, so pretty straightforward there. Of course, the example of in terms of how we define split payments, we did talk about this as well, right? So the very first payment that the person makes on the actual strategy session or the first month that they actually sign up, that first payment out of their 3 payments, right? So we got 800, 800, 800. That first payment is what we would define as upfront payment or upfront cash. Okay, so that is an acquisition metric. We've already talked about that. However, month 2 and month 3, these payments right here, these would what we call split payments. So that $800 in the month of April would be on April's sheet that we said, cool, I processed it in Stripe, or I processed it in my CRM or in my TCK with the invoice, automatic, all this stuff is saved, card on file, XYZ, right? Whatever process that is that we're using to collect that, as soon as we collect it, what we do is we go over to April 15th, on our actual tracking sheet. Okay, so in our tracking sheet, you're going to see literally there's a section on here that is called split payments. We go over there for, let's say, for example, March 15th, and let's say it's March 15th, Wednesday morning. I will go over to TCK, I collect the cash because I have the card on file, and then I go in and right over here, I put $800. Okay, and that goes in the column for split payments. Okay, and then next month, I'm going to be now in, this is March, I'm going to be in April, or I'm going to be in May, or whatever month I'm in. Whenever I collect the next one, whatever payments I'm collecting in the split payments, I'm then putting it in that column for that specific day. So as we are doing, this is what we call our daily collection, okay? So you're going to learn how to do your daily collection every single morning. That's going to be in upcoming trainings, okay? And we're basically tracking that inside of our tracking sheet. Does that make sense? So every single payment, right? Every single payment that is made after the initial month's monthly payment, that is what is considered a split payment. Does that make sense? Are you on the same page about that? I hope so. I hope that is very, very clear. Split payments are pretty straightforward when it comes to profitability metrics because it is a count metric, okay? So we've gone ahead and talked about that. Now let's go ahead and talk about total contract value or total contract number. So this basically just means, hey, what is the sum of all of the contract values that we have collected so far? So contract, this is very important to understand. Contract represents the money in which we are going to collect in the future, okay? So yes, there's upfront cash, and then there's in the future that is going to be in the form of split payments. So unpaid contracts amounts that are yet to be paid, aka split payments in the future, those are what is known in accounting as accounts receivable. And so if somebody asks you like, hey, how much AR do you expect to potentially collect next month? The answer to that question would be, hey, whatever are the upcoming projected split payments according to the customer's contracts, you add all of those up, and that would be what is considered the AR for that month, okay? And so what we're talking about here is when we say total contract, let's say, for example, this month, I signed up 3 customers at $2,400 each. So what would that be total? That means that I now have over here 7,200, right? 2 times, 3 times, yep, 7,200 over here, $7,200 in total contract value. Now, out of that 7,200, they might have given me, let's say those are all 3 pays, right? So they already paid 800 times 3. So 8 times 3 is going to be 24. So they've already paid 2,400 as upfront cash, okay? And then I have an additional 4,800 that is going to be my AR, okay? So let me clean this up for you so you can see exactly what we're talking about here, okay? So we have a total contract. So we have 3 units at $2,400 contract value each, okay? Now, total contract value, let's say this is the month of April, hypothetically, right? So let's say that's April. Total contract value in the month of April is $7,200. Now, that $7,200 is broken up into 2 parts, okay? I have upfront, and then I have AR. upfront is going to be, what was that, 8 times 3, that was going to be $2,400 over here, okay? So I have $2,400 in upfront cash, and then I have $4,800 in remainder split payments that I'm going to collect from those customers in the upcoming months, right? So I'm probably going to collect, if this is April, I'm probably going to collect another $2,400 in the month of May, right? So May, I'm going to collect May over here. I'm going to collect another $2,400. And then in the month of June, I'm going to collect another $2,400. And that would be the total $7,200 that I was going to collect in AR, right? And that is going to be the total of $7,200 in contract value that I was going to collect, $4,800 of that being in AR in upcoming months. I hope that makes sense. I know sometimes when you're first hearing about this, it can sound a little bit confusing, but I promise you right now, you're probably just going through conscious incompetence. You're just now learning like, oh, dang, okay, this is like a world that exists out there. Yes, profitability, accounting, finance, don't worry, you're going to be able to have it like the back of your hand, and it is going to make more and more sense as you go along. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So the question is, how do we actually define total contract? This is going to be another metric that you are going to see inside of both the cheat sheet and the master tracking sheet. So what we do here with total contract, so total contract is here, right? So we got total contract. What total contract is doing is it's taking our contract value and it's subtracting the back out contract. So back out contract is basically those that wanted a refund or wanted to back out of the program. We have to subtract their contract value. So total contract takes our contract value minus our back out contract, and that is what equals our total contract, okay? And so over here, contract value, it's outside the guide. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. You can read it over there as well, which is, hey, contract value is where we put our upfront sales or our delayed sales and what those contract values were. So let me go over here so you can see a little bit more. So we have upfront cash. Okay, so let's say, for example, this was upfront cash. Let's just use 1 unit, for example, $800 here. Contract value is going to be $2,400 here. Okay, let's say, for example, I also had 1 delayed sale, and that 1 delayed sale was here. My delayed sale that I collected was also going to be $800 in delayed sale cash. So that means my contract value is now going to be $4,800. Okay, and then let's say, for example, I had back out contract was 0, back out cash is 0, and back outs I had is 0. Okay, so that means my total contract over here is going to be $4,800, and is going to be equal to what is over here because I didn't have any back out. But if I had, let's say, one back out, my back out contract is going to be $2,400, and then my back out cash is going to be $800. So that means that my total contract would have been $2,400 because I had 1 back out. Okay, so that's kind of what it looks like. Again, this is inside of the guide. You will be able to go in and review it. And this is the reason why we say that total contract is net at the end of the day. What is the upfront contract plus the delayed contract, subtracting the back out contract? After the dust has settled, what is the total of all the contracts that we have, including the upfront and the AR? All of that is contract. That is what is considered total contract. Now, another quick point about this is that sometimes we will, kind of in slang language, refer to total contract as just contract value. And the reason is because most of your contracts are going to be like upfront contracts with very few delayed and backouts. And so typically, the kind of like in slang, quick conversation, we might say, hey, what's your contract value? You just want to understand that in your mind, you want to either ask, hey, are you referring to total contract? Are you referring to upfront contract? Like, what kind of contract are you talking about? Or you just understand that also might also mean just total contract net. Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be the second count metric, which is total contract. Now let's go ahead and talk about the third profitability metric, which is going to be total cash collected. So total cash collected is literally the master metric. It is literally what represents the sum of all of the cash that was collected from all of the sources in the entire business. And note, collected here means that it was processed, right? Either that it's waiting inside of the payment processor to be sent over to our bank, or that has already been received by the bank, right? So either way, it means that it's already been collected from the customer. Very important to understand. If you have any questions about that, make sure you ask in the student community, but it's very important to understand. Total cash collected means that we have already collected it from the customer. It's not AR, which is accounts receivable, that we're still waiting for from the customer. We already charged the customer, and it's either in our payment processor waiting to be sent to our bank, or it's already been sent from our payment processor into our bank, and it's just sitting there that we collected this month. Okay, so again, this is going to be another metric that you are going to see inside of the cheat sheet, okay? But this is also going to be sometimes confusing because you're going to see that there are multiple metrics that make up total cash collected, okay? So total cash collected is the addition of upfront cash plus delayed sale cash plus other cash minus back out cash plus split payment cash. Okay, and so this is what the entire equation looks like. Again, the guide is available for you to come back and review. Okay, so upfront cash plus delayed cash plus other cash minus backout cash plus split payment cash. Okay, and all the definitions are there for all of that. But again, you'll see what it's doing is it's basically summing up all of the aspects of cash across the entire business and then subtracting the backout cash, aka the refunds, and then giving us that number of, hey, what is the total cash in the entire business? Net. So it's basically net at the end of the day, after we include all the cash, subtracting all the refunds, all of that kind of stuff, net cash collected, actually processed, okay, after the dust has settled, how much was the total cash in the business for that month? That is total cash collected. And maybe not for the month, you can even ask, okay, what is total cash for the day? What is total cash for the year? All of that is also a potential, okay? So that, ladies and gentlemen, is profitability metric number 3, which is total cash collected. Now let's go ahead and talk about the actual calculated metric, and that's gonna be profitability metric number 4, which is contract ROAS, okay? So ROAS we are already familiar with because we did talk about upfront ROAS back when we talked about acquisition metrics. So you're already pretty much familiar with ROAS and the term ROAS. But in this case, what we're talking about is we're specifically talking about what is the return on ad spend that was as a result of the contracts that we had. So remember we talked about like total contract? That's what we're talking about here, okay? So we got a metric in our tracking sheet called contract ROAS, and contract ROAS is defined as total contract divided by ad spend. And so what we're basically saying on here is out of the ad spend that we spent, what was the return on investment that we got from that specifically for the contract? Now, this is different than upfront cash ROAS, and we'll talk about some of the differences in just a second again, a little bit more in detail here. But upfront cash ROAS was specifically cool. That was an acquisition metric, like to say like, hey, out of the ad spend that we spent, how much did we actually get back upfront, right? This one is out of the ad spend that we spend, how much did we actually collect in contract value, okay? And so again, we're using total contract here because it is a more accurate metric for total net, all contracts included. That's why we use total contract instead of just like, upfront contract or something like that, okay? Now again, do not worry, we ourselves, we don't always memorize all these. A lot of times I got to just look at the cheat sheet because if I'm like, okay, because a lot of these are calculated automatically in the actual master tracking sheet. And so if we're very more specific or particular about it, then we might actually look up the cheat sheet definition. But a lot of times they're already calculated, but you just want to understand the concept behind what these metrics are actually about. Okay, so real quick, how is contract ROAS represented? As you remember, all ROAS can be shown in 3 different formats. It can either be represented as a number, so it can be like 1x ROAS, 2x ROAS, 3x ROAS, whatever. It could be represented as a percent, 100%, 200%, 300%, or as a ratio, 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-1, right? And so these 3 are all the same. Okay, if I say 2x, 200, or 2-to-1, all the same. 3x, 300, 3-to-1, all the same. Each format says the same thing. It's just showing the same data in a different way. And so as an example, if I spend in a month $1,000 in ad spend and I have $5,000 come back to me in total contract value, okay, my total contract ROAS would be 5,000 divided by 1,000. And so what that means is that for that $1,000 in ad spend, I was able to get 5 times the return for the contract. And again, this same type of equation is the same thing that we talk about when we talk about upfront cash ROAS, we talk about total cash ROAS. That's what we're talking about. Now, what is contract ROAS used for? Remember, contract is not actual cash collected. And so contract ROAS is mainly used as a metric to be able to project what the future potential ROAS could be, emphasis on could, as long as we do a good job to actually collect on all of those contracts, aka the accounts receivable, the AR, right? And so this would depend on other metrics like our collection percentage. We're not going to talk about it in this. It's a different metric that's in your tracking sheet that basically tracks what is the collection of, are you collecting on your actual contracts, right? Now, it's very dangerous to make decisions based off of contract values, because contract value is just really kind of like fake money is sometimes what you got to think of it as, because it's just projected potential money you will collect in the future. You cannot say, cool, my contract ROAS is like 8x or 10x or 15x or whatever, so therefore I'm going to spend money based off of money that I don't have right now, but money that I'm going to collect in the future. It doesn't really mean anything. Contract value doesn't really mean anything unless we actually collect on that cash, aka cash in the bank. We process the card and that money is now in the bank, okay? It's not like, oh yeah, the person promised they're gonna pay. We're talking about actual cash collected is what really matters. And so we use contract ROAS for that projection metric, right? It's a good profitability metric for the purposes of projections, especially for newer businesses that just started that don't have a lot of historical data. We say, cool, assuming we do have a good collection percentage, let's go ahead and maybe project out what that ROAS could potentially look like in the future if we do actually collect on all of this cash, okay? So that's what contract ROAS is primarily used for. Does that make sense? I hope so. That is profitability metric number 4, which is contract ROAS. Now let's go ahead and talk about total cash ROAS, but now you kind of get the gist of how all these ROASs actually work, right? All these ROASs, how they're actually calculated and what that actually looks like. So very similar to upfront cash ROAS that we talked about in acquisition and then contract ROAS that we just talked about right now. Very similar, except now what it's a metric is a metric that is comparing how much ad spend did we have compared to the total cash that we actually collected. And so again, this is another metric that you are going to find inside of both your cheat sheet as well as on your master tracking sheet, okay? Total cash ROAS, this is automatically calculated. There is a KPI for it that we'll talk about in just a second, but total cash ROAS is total cash divided by ad spend. Again, remember we say total cash because we're talking about all the cash that was collecting the entire business, regardless of upfront, delayed, other cash, minus backouts, all that stuff. We're doing it. Cool. We spent $1,000 in ads. What does it look like in order to have a return on that, okay? And so in terms of how it's represented, again, it's represented either as a number, as a percent, or as a ratio. This is another example, kind of the same numbers here, but this time just specifically for total cash. So ad spend is $1,000. Total cash in the business that month we collected was $5,000. So total cash ROAS, which is a very, 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 very good and accurate profitable number, is because of the fact that this is cash collected. We say, you know what, we got a 5-to-1 total cash ROAS return on the profitability, not just upfront, total cash. Because remember, total cash includes the upfront as well. So this is across the entire business, split payments, upfront, across the whole business. This is what the profitability actually looks like. And so what do we actually use total cash ROAS for? Total cash ROAS really is the most accurate measurement of profitability across the entire business for ads specifically. And I'm actually going to go ahead and add that in here right now to be able to say for ads specifically. The reason I say that is because if we're talking about the most accurate measurement for profitability, period, that's probably going to be more like net operating income or like, something like if you wanted to say like, gross margin, net profit, that's probably a more accurate like net at the end of the day, how much money was actually made in the business, right? But when it comes to ads specifically and to be able to see what the profitability of the ads specifically is, right? That is going to be total cash ROAS, is by far going to be the best metric for that. And the reason for that is because if we compare all of the different ROASs that we have, right? Because we have these different kind of tools in the tool belt of these metrics that we're looking at. We have upfront cash ROAS, total contract ROAS, and then total cash ROAS, right? So upfront cash ROAS is a measure of how profitable we are in the acquisition upfront for new customers in that same month, right? This is what we are seeing in terms of, hey, are we profitable on the acquisition or not? For that, we are using upfront cash ROAS. Contract ROAS, this is a ROAS that we are using to project to be able to see, hey, potentially in the future, if we actually collect on all of these accounts receivables, if we collect on all these contracts, what would our total cash ROAS potentially look like in the future? Now, there's a little bit more of an explanation here. I'm not going to go into it. You can always read it inside of the guide. And then total cash ROAS, this is a measure of how profitable the company is overall, specifically around ads, but this time it's including both the upfront and the split payments. So this is why ROAS is what ultimately matters for profitability when it comes to ads. Because total cash ROAS is actually based on actual cash collected, it is the best measure for profitability when it comes to ads for the company for both acquisition and total cash collected. And remember, we're saying profitability specifically on the ads side of things. Of course, when we get into accounting and finance, there are other metrics around profitability. Beautiful. Now that you understand that, ladies and gentlemen, that is profitability metric number 5, which is total cash ROAS. And now we've actually even touched on some of the differences between the ROASs so that way you can understand, cool, this is what this ROAS actually means. Now, profitability metric number 6 is ad spend to cash percentage, or sometimes known as ad spend to cash ratio. This is basically what is the percentage of the total cash that we spent for that month that was allocated towards ad spend. Again, this is automatically calculated for you inside of the actual tracking sheet. You will also find it inside of the cheat sheet, okay? Now, this is defined as ad spend divided by total cash collected. This gives us an idea of how much of our total cash is being spent on ads every single month. Okay, this metric gives us a good idea on the profit and loss statement, which is also known as a P&L. You'll learn more about that in the future once we get into accounting and finance and that kind of stuff, of how much money every single month is actually going towards ads. Now, there is a KPI that goes along with this, but again, we will talk about that when we get to the KPIs section of what we want to keep this number below. Okay, so what does all of this mean when put together? Well, these are the 6 big metrics when it comes to understanding ads and lead gen profitability, okay? We've gone ahead and talked about putting all of them together in terms of what it looks like. And then specifically when we start to combine them with the acquisition metrics that we previously learned, we start to get a very good idea and a very good pulse on really both sides of the coin, both front-end acquisition as well as back-end cash and split payments. So the same way that a doctor has their own metrics in order to keep the patient healthy, these are the metrics to know if our business is healthy, specifically around acquisition and lead generation, as well as the back-end cash and what that looks like. So again, I'm going to say this 1,002 times. Yes, there are other acquisition and profitability metrics, but these are really the big ones that if you understand them, it's going to take you quite far. And then down the road, we will go ahead and talk about more of those as you go ahead and build your understanding. And again, the same way that we're talking about, just like a doctor has, ranges and KPIs that to know if somebody's healthy, right? Hey, if your BMI is over this, if your blood pressure is over this, if your glucose numbers are over this, if your lipid, cholesterol, LDL, cholesterol, HDL, cholesterol numbers are over this, that is not good. In the same way, we know that guess what? There are KPIs that go along with each of these metrics to know, hey, if something is over a certain amount, then that is also not healthy. And so let's go ahead and talk about those KPIs finally, because I know we've been holding off on this for a while. Let's go and talk about the KPIs for acquisition and profitability. So in this section, we're going to actually talk about what those KPIs are to know if something is actually healthy or not. Now, what's going to happen is that you will need both the guide and the cheat sheet. Okay, so we've done a painstaking job of putting together that cheat sheet for you, so that way all of the KPIs are represented on there. And again, remember, we do update that on a regular basis, so be sure to check on that as time goes on. But really, a lot of these KPIs that we're about to go through are going to be not only in this guide, but also inside of that cheat sheet. Okay, but the cheat sheet does not have the explanation for those metrics, which is what we're going to go through right now. So let's go ahead and go through those explanations and those KPIs. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and divide these into acquisition side and then profitability side. Okay, so on the acquisition side, there are 2 KPIs that you need to be familiar with. There's a KPI for CAC, okay, and there's a KPI for upfront cash ROAS. For CAC, we want our average CAC, okay, to be 16.7% of the expected average contract value, okay? Why not 20%? Because 16.7% accounts for those contracts that we will not collect on, because you are going to have a percentage of defaulted contracts. So example, if you have a price point of your program of $4,800, that means that your CAC is going to be around $800, okay? And remember, this is ad spend CAC specifically. We talked about all of that in the past, right? So about 16.7% is going to give us about a 20% cash ROAS on our P&L. Again, I know some of that might go over your head. When you come back to this in the future, it'll make a lot more sense to you, okay? Upfront cash ROAS, we are looking for about a 3 to 4x, aka a 300 to 400% return on investment, with the understanding that as we have more and more maybe potential defaults and all that kind of stuff down the road, it will potentially come down to a 2.5 or 3x with collection. So as long as we are 2.5x on upfront cash ROAS, and that makes that we're making sure that we're not too negative on front-end acquisition, we are golden and we are good. Again, this might be theoretical for you, this might be hypothetical for you, but you will be able to go ahead and plant the seeds and then come back to this in the future, and it'll make so much more sense to you as you get the practical filling in the information, and then you'll be able to understand this more and more, okay? Profitability side, profitability, if we can say it properly, profitability, there we go. Total cash ROAS, we're looking for 6 to 8x ROAS, okay? If we're doing below $300,000 a month in total cash, okay? Then we're aiming for 6 to 8x. As we scale past $300,000 a month, the ROAS is going to come down a little bit because of the fact that as you scale ad spend, ROAS typically does come down as you scale as a company. That's fine. We're expecting maybe down the road, we maybe get like a, 6, even 5 or 6x at past $300,000 a month is totally fine. Now, we're looking for a minimum of 5x, so that way we can be at or below 20% ad spend on the P&L. Again, I know P&L, these statements, it might be a little bit overwhelming, but just stick with it. With repetition, you will get the hang of it, okay? Contract ROAS, we're looking for about a 6 to 10x on contract ROAS, right? Especially as you scale past $300,000 a month, we will potentially get down to like 6 to 8x at scale, as long as all the pieces in the acquisition machine are working. And then ad spend to cash, we're looking for about 20 to 25%. We don't want to spend more than 20 to 25% of our total cash for any given month, specifically towards ad spend. Some accountants will say, hey, as long as you keep it less than 25%, that's fine. We typically like to think around 20% is ideal. And so again, these are theoretical numbers, but then once you actually fill in the data inside of your master tracking sheet and you do it on a regular basis, you'll be able to get data over the course of an entire month. And then you'll be able to say, oh, okay, so now I can compare how my data is looking to these actual expectations and KPIs and see what actually needs to be improved from there. Now, the other question that you might have, right? Because what we did is we just went ahead and gone over some of the KPIs around. We said we went over CAC, we went over upfront cash ROAS, we went over contract ROAS, total cash ROAS, and ad spend to cash. Wait a second. What about these other metrics? So these other metrics, they do not have KPIs because you typically do not have KPIs around count metrics, because you can't have a KPI around count metrics. Like count metrics, you literally count it. It is what it is, right? So there's going to be no, KPI around ad spend, number of units, total upfront cash. There might be goals and targets that you set for yourself for a given month, but there's no KPIs that it should be around this unless, you're away from your goal or something like that, right? And then also for average upfront cash, it's kind of like a count metric, even though technically it's a calculated metric. It's like, it is what it is. You just basically calculate like, hey, how much is your ad spend? How much is your average upfront? How much is your total units? You go ahead and get the average upfront cash. It is what it is. And so for that reason, there is no KPIs for these metrics, but there are KPIs for these other metrics that we went ahead and went over right now. And then again, down the road, as you go ahead and fill in more of that data, it is going to make more and more sense to you. So having said that, let's go ahead and go through a walkthrough step by step to really kind of help you cement as much as possible. Again, I know that right now it's very theoretical, it's very hypothetical. It's going to be very difficult for you to cement this 100% for yourself, but it will make more and more sense to you in the future. But let's go ahead and go through a tracking profitability walkthrough and go through some example data to show you what this might potentially look like, so you can actually see, okay, hey, what is the actual kind of how all these numbers and how everything plugs together. So let's go ahead and do a split screen and then get over to the master tracking sheet to look at some potential example data. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the step-by-step for tracking profitability walkthrough. Primarily, we are going to be working inside of our master tracking dashboard when we are doing this. So step number one of this process is to make sure that we do have the daily reporting completed. So we went ahead and gone over that inside of a previous mini training in a previous training section. So that's going to be very important. Okay. Now, what you are also going to notice on here. So for example, we're going to continue with, the hypothetical random kind of days that are janky over here. So this is a date in the past, but just stick with us, right? Because that way you can kind of follow along. So let's say, for example, it is the morning of 4/8, right? It's 8 a.m. on 4/8, April 8th, okay? And what we're basically doing is we've gone ahead and completed our daily reporting for April 7th, okay? Now, what we also want to make sure that we have, and this is going to be very important when we talk about tracking profitability, is when we're tracking profitability, we want to make sure that we also have all of our other data filled in. So you can see on here, if I hit this column, this row over here, 108, and that is for 7. So you're going to see that it's going to go ahead and highlight that for me. Now, you will also notice that we do not have all of the data filled in for up until 4/7. And this is going to be very important to have, right? So when we're tracking profitability and we're doing that in the morning, it's going to be important that we're looking at the entire acquisition system as a whole. So yes, we're talking about, parts of lead gen, but really profitability and acquisition as a whole is going to also require all of our sales data. It is also going to require all of our sales cash data. So that's going to be very important for us to be able to have filled in. Okay, so that's the reason why this specific training section and this mini training is going to be working hand in hand with the sales data and KPIs training that is going to be found in those other modules. And then also, even though it doesn't necessarily impact directly some of our acquisition numbers around ROAS, it is extremely beneficial to also have our lead nurture numbers in here as well that are going to be found over in the setter processes, outbound lead nurture metrics, where we can say, okay, cool, how many outbound calls were there, how many QCs were booked, how many QCs showed, XYZ. So we want to make sure that we have all of that data filled in up until the data in which we are evaluating and zooming out. So we have all of these so we can compare them to the KPIs. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and fill in all of this data with some test data. So that way we can just go ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and pull some stuff together. And I'm going to go ahead and pause in just a second right now. And then we're going to come back and we're going to have all of that data up until 4/7. All right, welcome back. So what we've gone ahead and done, and this is going to be something that you do learn over in the sales data and KPIs trainings and the setter KPIs training. What we've done is we've gone ahead and filled in all of the data up until 4.7. So you'll see on here, if I hit the row, you'll see that all of the data is filled in, right? For the lead gen metrics, we have the setter metrics, all of the sales data has been filled in as well as the sales cash data has been filled in. And so if you remember, the sales cash data especially is going to be absolutely critical because we can't calculate ROAS without that. Okay, so we want to make sure that the daily reporting is up to date for that. What we're then going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and look at the acquisition metrics and really look at the KPIs within there, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and scroll over all the way to the right. And again, holding shift on the keyboard and then scrolling with your mouse is going to allow you to do that. And then you will see that what we're going to look at over here is we're going to look at average upfront cash. We're going to look at CAC as well as upfront cash ROAS. And we have our KPIs that we are looking for that as well, right? So we're looking over here, average upfront cash, BG, and then we have our ad spend CAC, which is BK, and then BL. Right now, obviously that might change here and there if we add a column, but just showing you what that looks like. Now, we're not looking at the daily view, okay? Because on the daily, it's going to fluctuate. It's going to go up and down, X, Y, Z. What we do is we scroll down here and we're going to look at, okay, hey, what is this looking like total over here? So our average upfront cash is about 1314. Okay, that's our average upfront cash. And if we just go ahead and double click on that formula there, we'll see that that's total upfront cash divided by the number of units, okay? And then we look over here and we say, okay, look at our ad spend CAC. That means our ad spend CAC is about 529. And what we're really looking for is about a 16.7% of our average ticket is what we're looking at in terms of ad spend CAC. And so if we look over here, 3,600 is our average total contract value. So 16.7%, that would be our KPI here. Now, again, this is just example data. Your offer price might not be 3,600, right? I'm just showing you an example of what that would look like. And so if we were actually going to do, let's say 3,600 was going to be 16.7%. So we're going to do, cool, 3,600 times 0.3.16 right? So that'll give us a CAC of, and if you don't know how to do that, you do 3,600 times, and then you take 16.7, you move the decimal place over to the left 2 times, and then you have that as a percentage, right? So the maximum that our CAC is supposed to be is under around, let's say $600, right? So I can actually edit that KPI because that's specific to my offer, under $600, which you'll see on here, our CAC is 529, which is under that amount, which is awesome, beautiful. And then we're looking over here at our upfront cash ROAS. Our upfront cash ROAS, we're looking for about 3 to 4x on our upfront cash ROAS, right? So we're at about 2.48, which is almost borderline 3. It's not exactly 3, which is what we're actually looking for. So we want to kind of make a note of that, right? There might be many reasons why that might actually be the case. And so again, what we would highly recommend is taking notes throughout this entire process. And so just as an example, there's many different tools that you could use in order to take notes. But let's say, for example, you were going to use, let's say, ClickUp, you wanted to use, paper in hand, you wanted to have a notebook. It does not matter how you actually do it. So if I was to show you, let's say we made a document in ClickUp called acquisition action log, right? And so right now we are doing this over here for the date was 4/7 is what we're doing here, right? So let's say, for example, I'm going to go ahead and do this for 4/7 evaluation, right? And it'll tell me, cool, this is done at today at whatever. And then over here, I can say, cool. And I can just jot this down, right? So acquisition, I'm just externally processing. I'm just journaling here, right? I'm just going ahead and kind of putting it out there. So that way we can say, cool, 2.48, upfront cash ROAS. Not exactly sure what is going on here, but this is slightly below KPI, right? So that might be because my ads aren't performing as much as I want them to be, many different reasons, but I'm just making sure that I'm writing it down. And then it's very easy for me when I get coaching, when I get help from community members, whatever it might be, I can evaluate and say, cool, I can just go to my notes and see, hey, this is what I'm having issues with. Let's go ahead and, hey, I need some help to be able to evaluate what's going on here, right? From there, we can then look at the other profitability metrics around contract ROAS, total cash ROAS, and ad spend to cash. Now, what you will notice on here, so if we look at our contract ROAS over here, contract ROAS, we're typically looking for it to be between 6 to 10x, right? So we're over here sitting at about 7x right now. And so this is at 7. I want to go ahead and actually make this, if I go ahead and add another decimal place on this, you'll see there's probably rounding up a little bit, which is what I wanted to go ahead and show me on here. So we're at 6.8, right? We're looking at about 6 to 10x. So it's it's not bad, but if we can get that up, that'd probably be better as well. And then total cash ROAS is sitting at about 3, and we're supposed to be at about 6 to 8, right? So again, if I go ahead and highlight this, add another decimal place, we're at 2.8. So that is definitely definitely low on there. And the reason why, and if I look at our cash over here, is because I can see that we don't have a lot of split payments coming through. And that's the reason why our total cash. So if you look at over here, our total cash for the month so far is $10,400. And most of that is coming from the upfront, because if you look at our total upfront cash is $9,200. And so a lot of that is coming because total cash ROAS measures not only the upfront, but it also measures the, the split payments, the back end, what's going on here, right? And so I'll see that, if I was doing this much, I would say, maybe the total cash ROAS is going to catch up because I'm looking at the contract ROAS. There's such a big discrepancy here. And so therefore the contract ROAS is probably a bigger indicator, because it looks like this company, if they have not been in business very long, they don't have a lot of split payments coming through on this specific month. And so this data, just looking at this, I'm like, okay, cool. Well, it looks like if they just started this month and they just started advertising, then their contract ROAS is pretty high at 6, right? So that means that that'll probably catch up over on the total cash ROAS. And that's the reason why it's low, because they just started this month, right? So hypothetically. So again, this might be another thing that I will go ahead and annotate over here. And I say, cool, contract ROAS, and I'll say total cash ROAS. And so over here, we say total cash ROAS is low, right? ROAS is low at, 2.8x is what we're looking at. But that's because we don't have a lot of split payments, I think, right? So I'll put I think over here, and then, contract ROAS is healthy at 6.8, I believe it was 6.8. Yep, that's correct, 6.8x. And so with enough months, if we collect on all of those contracts, we should be good to get our total cash ROAS up, right? So I'm just taking some notes here so that way everything is properly annotated. Beautiful, very nice. Now, after that, we can, like we said, take notes, journal, externally process what may potentially be going right, what might be going wrong. What do you notice? What do you think? How are things looking overall? What do the numbers mean about how the system is actually running, right? So we want to go ahead and evaluate what's happening here. And then some of the other things we can also look at around profitability, right? So if we're filling in our expenses on a regular basis, of course, inside of this example, we do not have that. But of course, if you were doing that, we could look at our gross margin so far. Say, hey, our total expenses are this, our gross profit is this, our gross margin is this over here. And then we can also look at our ad spend to cash over here, right? So over here, you'll see all of these numbers are looking a little bit janky over here. So what I would do is I would go ahead and put this as a percent, so it makes it all nice and tidy. And then you'll see that, okay, our ad spend to cash is about 35%. That means that out of our total cash, 10,400, we have spent about 35% of that. So if I double click on this, you'll see we have spent 35% of that in ad spend so far for the month. So that is a little bit concerning. But again, if that is the case, because maybe down the road next month we'll have a lot more split payments coming through from all of this contract value, because you see our total contract value is 25,200 and our total upfront is 9,200. So that means that next month we're probably going to have a good chunk of split payments that are going to come through, and that's going to help us get some of that profitability back up a little bit more. And then from there, of course, if we wanted to go ahead and look at all the other KPIs, again, we do recommend looking at this at the bottom over here, because when you scroll to the bottom, you'll see all of the summations as well as the averages, right? So we're looking at some of the different pieces of the puzzle here. We're looking at, okay, cool, how is our, CTR all doing, our CTR link click? We're looking at our cost per lead. So over here on the lead gen side, our CTR all is supposed to be at 3%, we're at 3.89, looking good. CTR link click is supposed to be at 1.5, we're at 2.27%. So it looks like ads are doing pretty good. CPL over here, that's the reason why we have these orange boxes, so it allows us to have our focus immediately on the important KPIs that we're looking for. So cost per lead over here, we're looking at it to be under $10, we're at $6.74, which is awesome. It's supposed to be 70%, we're at 80%. So on the lead gen side of things, things are looking pretty good. So if we go over here and look at the sales numbers, and obviously we'll talk more about this when we talk about sales data and KPIs, but looking at this over here, right? So I'm looking at, okay, total upfront close percentage is supposed to be at around 30% plus, right? Hopefully we're aiming around 50, 60%. So again, this is just some KPIs that we have on here, but 41% is looking pretty good. But if I look at, oh, wait a second, my group booking percentage, this is supposed to be around 6, 7, 8%. So it just looks like I'm not booking enough calls, and that's the reason why all the way downstream I have all of these numbers that they're not as great as I would want them to be, and then the ad spend cash isn't as the way I want it to be, even though everything else in the entire system is looking pretty good, right? The reason why some of the numbers are not good is because I'm not booking enough calls from the actual community. So I probably need to double down on my lead nurture, my outbound lead nurture, so that way I can book more calls. Because if I look at this, I would say, hey, scale baby scale over here, right? So it's like, okay, ads are doing great here, right? So looking at over here, the data, all these numbers are looking within KPI. Beautiful, right? If I look at how the sales piece of things are looking at, total upfront close percentage at 41%, 41%. Hey, not terrible. Maybe there's some work to be done, especially when we talk about the community strategy. We can aim for maybe around 50%, but 41 isn't terrible, right? But I look at the group booking percentage, that's a little bit low. And then over here, looking at the rest of these numbers over here, everything's looking pretty good, except for the fact that we got to get some of more calls booked from the community, because we have over here, if you look at this, right, because the group booking percentage is going to be number of calls scheduled divided by the number of group members, right? So I've had 19 calls scheduled, but I've had 444 people join my group. And so that's a big drop off there, right? So if 444 people joined my group this month and I've only had 19 calls scheduled, something's wrong there. And so that's probably something that I would dive into and see, hey, why are we not getting enough calls scheduled? What's actually happening on there? Now, again, we will have more and more reps and, iterations on this, and obviously jumping on coaching calls and master classes and hot seats and all that kind of stuff that we can go ahead and talk more about looking at the data and deciphering, hey, what might actually be the bottleneck and the constraint here. But I just wanted to go ahead and show you some of those additional pro tips as we talk about really looking at the metrics around profitability, looking at the entire business as a whole here inside of the tracking sheet, and really zooming out, getting our head above the water to be able to see, hey, what's going on here, right? So we're definitely doing that on a daily basis in order to be able to evaluate what is the overall health of the business, what is the profitability of it, what does it look like in each of the different systems. This is how we are doing so by using the tool of the master tracking sheet. We can actually now look at, that diagram that we have. So down here, this diagram that we have over here that really shows, hey, these are the lead gen metrics, and we have the lead nurture metrics and the sales and the profitability, right? So this right here is the actual kind of manifestation of this, right? So we can then zoom in and look at each of the different pieces, right? So if we want to look at, hey, how is our landing page converting? We can look at our LPC, right? We can look at our lead conversion rate. We can look at all of these numbers via this tracking sheet to be able to actually decipher, hey, how are each of these individual pieces performing? And then we can actually go ahead and look at how the entire acquisition is performing as well, right? So the master tracking sheet is like, if I could overlay this image right here, this image on top of this master tracking sheet so you can see what that looks like. That's basically what we're talking about here, right? This master tracking sheet allows you to be able to see that. And then of course, we're taking notes along the way for that. So that way, hey, when we jump on with a coach, when we jump on a master class, when we're in a hot seat, when we need help and somebody asks, hey, where is the constraint in your business? Where are you struggling? You have a very, very, very good understanding of what all of that looks like. So hope that makes sense. This is going to be the step-by-step tutorial and step-by-step walkthrough on the tracking profitability. We're going to go ahead and jump back over to the main training. All right, welcome back from that step-by-step tracking profitability walkthrough. Again, I know even with as many examples as we provide, there's going to be nothing is going to be able to replace the actual repetition that you will be able to do for yourself with your own data, with your own numbers, with your own metrics, and then compare what your metrics are to the actual KPIs. There's nothing going to replace that. And so it's going to take time, and you just have to put up with feeling a little bit overwhelmed right now until you actually get enough data and you can actually stick with it long enough. Okay, so just a reminder, this may go over your head for now, okay? You might only be able to do basic profitability, right? So you do your daily reporting and then you basically track, okay, you know what? I spent this much in ads. I don't have any units yet. And so you're only doing basic tracking profitability. But then as you get more of those lead nurture metrics in, the sales metrics, you get some calls scheduled, you get some group members, you do some outbound, you get some units. All of that is going to allow you then to be able to track those metrics and see, hey, cool, I got some number of units. I got some upfront cash. I got some total cash. Let me see how I stand with all of that. But until then, it's theoretical. And all we are doing right now is very importantly just planting those seeds, so that way once you get to that point, you'll be like, oh, it's all making sense to me now. So with that being said, let's go ahead and start closing out this beefy, meaty, meat and potatoes tracking section. Let's go ahead and talk about bringing it all together. Every day as you track profitability, you have to be able to keep an eye and a pulse on, hey, how much have I spent on ads so far? And am I profitable right now, right? Maybe I'm not profitable. I got to keep an eye on that, right? What is my total cash ROAS for the month so far? What was it last month? How am I doing compared to last month? How am I doing this month compared to that? What is my CAC month to date? What was it last month? What is it this month? If you cannot answer those questions, then you have no idea what is going on with your ads, right? You always have to keep a lookout on, hey, how much money have I spent on ads this month? And how much money have I made back from ads this month? Because you cannot continue to go negative on acquisition and profitability too long, because that would mean that you are on the wrong track. And we've already talked about the differences between negative on acquisition, break even on acquisition, positive on acquisition. You cannot afford to run negative on acquisition because you are not an investor funded company, right? You're not. And so that means that you do not have the data to be able to say, cool, I'm going to go into debt and then make that money later on. And so you cannot do that because it's going to cause you to go out of business. And so when we understand that, we now understand why it's so important that we actually track profitability and get our head above the water, right? So we do our daily reporting. Once all the numbers are up to date, we're doing tracking profitability first before we get into all of the ads metrics, right? We don't care about right now CPM, CTR, landing page conversion, cost per lead, none of that stuff, right? We're going to get into that when we talk about daily judgment, right? All of that stuff. But tracking profitability, we're looking at the major metrics. That's what we're doing right now in this training section. And then all of those other lead generation metrics, they do not mean anything if they are not within the context of acquisition, right? If we're just kind of, closing one eye and then only looking at part of the equation, well, we don't care about that right now. Again, we're going to talk about that later on when we actually get into the daily judgment part, right? But right now we're saying, cool, how is our overall profitability? How is our overall acquisition? Let's go ahead and look at those critical metrics for that so we can then see what all of that is looking like. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as we close out this training section, I want to welcome you again and again and again. Welcome to learning how to be a professional entrepreneur. Because depending on where you are in your entrepreneurial journey right now, what we just talked about inside of this training section was either priceless, valuable for you because you see that you have never seen any of this content put together in such an organized way before. So you're like mind blown. This has been amazing. Or a lot of what we just talked about maybe went over your head. And if a lot of that went over your head, then the question you got to ask yourself is, cool, what do I got to do in order to get to the point where a lot of what these people are talking about, what's going on in this training is actually second nature for me? Because that would mean that I've now become a professional entrepreneur. And so depending on where you are in your journey, this training will mean different things for you. And so I would urge you that you want to take those steps in the direction for everything that we talked about, making you very excited because of the fact that that means that you are getting to the point where you are becoming that professional entrepreneur, right? But if you're like, what in the world is going on? Then guess what? That is a telltale sign that your skills and your identity have not yet caught up to the point where you are becoming a professional entrepreneur. Is that making sense, right? This entire program that you are a part of right now is a professional development program to help you further your career as an online entrepreneur, to be able to open those doors and lay that foundation for you. And so I promise you, we promise you, that if you stick with this profession long enough, and this is one of the quotes that we learned earlier on, and we took it to heart and we repeated it to ourselves every single day, that if you stick with something long enough, it is impossible for you not to eventually get good at it, okay? You will eventually get to the point where you have gone ahead and made so many implementations, you've taken so much action, right? And everything that we've talked about inside of this training section, that this training will become one of the most valuable trainings that you have ever gone through in your entire career because it's organized for you to really open up the doors around the metrics that actually matter. And so if you stick with this profession long enough, in the same way that a doctor sticks with going to undergrad and then medical school and then, residency and that entire process, you're talking about 8+ years and then 2 to 4 years of specialization, all of that in order to come out being a doctor, and there's like topics that they got to study. If you stick with this profession long enough, you will be able to go ahead and get the fruits of all of that labor. But guess what? For that person who just jumps around, they don't have any fruits at the end of that labor. And so the question is up to you whether or not you will actually stick with it, and then you'll be able to go back and revisit this training over and over and over again. And every single time you do, it will continue to give you dividends and dividends and dividends further and further into your career. So ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, this has been step number 2 of the daily management for profitable acquisition training, which is like the meaty one, right? Because when you say daily management for profitable acquisition, we're literally doing daily management for this purpose, which is to track profitability. And now we understand, cool, acquisition metrics, profitability metrics, and we understand the KPIs of each of them. So if you have any questions about this section or anything that we have discussed inside of this section or anything in general as well, make sure you go ahead and drop it inside of the student community so that way one of the community members can go ahead and help you. But again, remember, you want to go back and study this. Are you probably going to have to study this, look at the guide, take notes, all that stuff? Probably, yes. And so that is what we would urge you to do because it is such an important foundational training to wrap your head around this as a professional entrepreneur. So with that being said, again, if you have any questions, make sure you drop it in the student community. But we are not done yet. We got 2 other steps that we got to go through for the daily management process. With that being said, we will catch you in the next training section. Hey team, welcome to this training section, step number 3 of the daily management process, which is daily judgment day. You get the shtick. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. Previously, we've already spoken about the importance of daily reporting, which is making sure that you fill in your tracking sheet every single day. So we've already talked about that. And then we also talked about tracking profitability. So looking at the acquisition metrics as well as the ad profitability metrics, you say, hey, how profitable is everything running overall, right? And so we said that is us zooming out and looking at the tracking sheet to see everything, and we must keep a pulse on that at all times to say, hey, we spent this much on ads, and not just closing one eye and only looking at the lead gen metrics. No. We got to look at the entire thing and say, hey, what is going on here? Even if we don't have sales, we got to make sure, how is the business doing as a whole? So then inside of this training section, we are going to go ahead and talk about daily judgment and specifically what that entails and how all of that actually comes together. So let's go ahead and actually give you a context and introduction to that. So what it is time now to do is it's time now to zoom in on the micro view of ads, right? So previously when we were talking about profitability, like we said, we were zoomed out looking at acquisition and profitability metrics, right? And that's why most of our focus was on that master tracking sheet and really looking at the inputs, the outputs, the efficiency of those inputs and those outputs. And now that we finalized looking at that entire system as a whole, it's now time to focus on the individual pieces, specifically the ads pieces that make up a part of that acquisition system. So that's primarily what we're going to be doing inside of this training section. Now, it's also important to note that many times, and especially as maybe down the road, as in your entrepreneurial career, you're going to go through other programs and other courses. Most of the time when people talk about managing ads, right, that is where they close one eye and they only focus on, hey, let me see what is going on this piece of things, right? Let me go ahead and close one eye, right, and look through, the cracks of my fingers to only focus on, hey, how is this ad set doing? How is this ad doing? And those kinds of things. But as you can see, the approach that we have taken in designing this curriculum is to go ahead and put the most important pieces front and center, which was profitability, acquisition, how the entire machine is doing is the point first and foremost. And then after that, we're then going in and we're zooming in and saying, cool, let's now look at the ad sets. Now let's look at the ads. Let's now look at each of the pieces that actually make all of that up. Okay. And so that's exactly what we are going to be doing specifically inside of this training section. So what is daily judgment and why is it important? So the big mistake that everyone makes when it comes to paid advertising is that they say, cool, once my ads are working, once they are profitable, that they're always going to stay that way. They're always going to stay profitable, like they are winners and that's it. But the thing is that one of the laws in the universe is entropy. Maybe you know what that is. Maybe you do not know what that is. Maybe this is your first time hearing about it. Well, the law of entropy is that it's basically the second law of thermodynamics, in which that basically everything goes over time towards increased entropy. Entropy is basically more disorder, more chaos. And so basically the entire universe is expanding and continuing more towards that state of disorder unless an outside force actually comes in and actually corrects it. Okay, so everything in the universe will move towards disorder and decay over time. And the same is also true for your ads. The marketplace in which your ads are actually running, the ad platforms, they themselves are always changing, right? There's different competitors that are coming on. People are getting more desensitized to certain messages. People are getting banner blindness to certain creatives. Everything is changing in that environment. And so therefore there's entropy that is taking place on your actual ads. And so just because something is working right now, just because something is profitable, just because something is a winner when it comes to the specific lead gen and ads and ad sets and that kind of stuff, does not mean it is going to stay that way. And so without intervention, without you actually going in and updating it, your ads are only going to continue to degrade over time. And so we're going to talk more about this when we actually talk about consistent ad work, right? So that is going to be the fourth step of this entire daily management piece, is on a regular basis, you actually need to be doing the ad work that is necessary to create new copy and new creative and new headlines and all of that stuff and new targeting to be able to have a bank of winners that is ready to deploy once your current winners are not working as properly. Now, we'll talk about that in the future. However, in this specific step, we're talking about daily judgment so that way you can understand, cool, I'm going to have to kill off some of the losers. I am going to have to go ahead and duplicate some of the winners while they are still good, right? And so right now, when we talk about daily judgment, what we're talking about is on a daily basis, you're going to be looking at your ads account. You're going to be looking at the ads that are currently running, and you're going to say, hey, cool, what are the losers that I can actually turn off? What are the ones that maybe used to be good winners, but they're no longer? Or maybe I had some tests running, but they're not running that good. I got to turn them off. Or while these ad sets are winners right now, do I need more lead flow? How is the rest of my pipeline looking? Let me go ahead and scale some of these. Let me go ahead and duplicate some of these, right? And then looking at, cool, which of the variables are actually performing, right? Is my targeting performing the way I wanted it to? My creative, my headline, my copy, taking notes of that like a scientist, so that way you're kind of putting it in the back of your head when you go in and do that consistent ad work in step number 4, you know, based off of real data, what is working and what is not working, and what are some of the tests that you would like to go ahead and experiment with in the future. Now, what I do want to go ahead and talk about to you is talk about the parts of daily judgment. So in the same way, we have 3 steps within daily management. We're going to talk about some of the parts within daily judgment specifically. So we're focusing on right over here, daily judgment. So part 1 is going to be all about turning off losers. Part number 2 is going to be all about duplicating and scaling winners. And then part number 3 is all about testing new. Okay, so visually, this is kind of what the entire process looks like. So we did have our first judgment day, and it's going to be kind of very similar to our first judgment day that we did previously when we launched, right? So we had our first launch day, and then we had our first judgment day. And then what we did was we said, cool, we're going to wait, 24, 36, 48 hours, whatever we said in that training. And then we're going to go ahead and turn off the losers, and we're going to duplicate and scale the winners. And then we're going to go ahead and test some new things. And then we're going to go ahead and repeat the same process, right? And so it's this ongoing process that we are doing with kind of daily judgment as we're going along here, right? So after our first launch day and judgment day, we enter this ongoing cycle of turning off losers, scaling winners, and testing new. So let's go ahead and break down each of those 3 parts right now so we can actually talk about that. So judgment day process breakdown. So again, we extensively talked about judgment day back when we talked about stage 2, which was launch. And this is going to be extremely similar to that, except now we're kind of focusing more on the ongoing process, right? So part number one is going to be all about turning off losers. So basically what we do is we do our daily reporting, we do our tracking profitability, we open up our ads account, and we say, cool, let's see how our ads doing. Let's see how our ad set's doing. And we're basically seeing, hey, let's go ahead and flip back between different timelines, right? Let's go ahead and see, hey, let's look at the 72 hours, let's look at 48 hours, let's look at the 3-day average, let's look at the 7-day average. And what we're doing is we're looking to see if those things that were winners before, are they now becoming losers? Are they maybe not performing as much as they should, right? And then on top of that, we always want to make sure that we're looking at deeper funnel metrics. We'll talk about that more in just a second. We never mess with the winner. We've talked about that in the past as well. And then making sure that the ad sets that we are judging, the ad sets that we are potentially thinking of turning off, they are averaging less better than they used to, or that they're actually mature if they're, let's say, an initial test or something like that, right? Then step number 2 is all about duplicating and scaling the winners. And this is another thing that a lot of people mess up and don't realize, is that when an ad set is doing really well, that is the time that you need to duplicate and scale it if you need more lead flow, okay? A lot of people wait until the ad set is no longer performing well, because remember, everything is going to decay, right? So your ad sets over time are going to decrease in performance. And so if an ad set is just absolutely crushing it, if an ad is just absolutely crushing it, and it's actually locked in on a specific audience that is doing very well, what you want to do is you want to take the time at that time if you need the lead flow. Remember, if you don't need the lead flow, then you just ignore it. You just say, hey, it's a good problem to have. You just, I got too many leads. I don't need to touch this. But if you need the lead flow, the time to actually scale that up is going to be when it is a winning ad set. So what you do is you duplicate that and then you scale those winners. Okay. So this is the step where we duplicate the winning ad sets if we need more budget and flow. If you will need more flow, then you want to duplicate the winners while they are still winners, because remember, all the winners will eventually become losers over time because of the degradation that is happening on there, okay? And of course, as you are scaling, you want to keep an eye on, you don't just scale. You don't keep an eye on the total daily budget that you have that you're going to be spending, because then you end up spending more than you actually wanted to spend, right? And then step number 3 is testing new. Again, we will talk more about this with the consistent ad work step, specifically in the daily management process. But now that we've completed kind of one launch, it's going to be a matter of, hey, we got to repeat that over and over and over again in order to put a small percentage of our budget to be testing winners in the background, okay? So basically what I want to go ahead and talk about right now is I do want to go ahead and talk about deeper metrics versus surface level metrics. Okay, so it's going to be very important. I want to kind of dive into this specific part right here, right? So deeper funnel metrics always win. I want to go ahead and dive into this specific rule right here when it comes to turning off losers. And we have talked about this in the past, but now that we've talked about acquisition and profitability, I want to revisit that so that way you can understand this as well. Because sometimes it is possible to have an acquisition machine that is profitable on the deeper metrics, but not so good on the lead gen metrics. What do I mean by this? So you might have an ad that sometimes, the CPC is not that good. The CTR is not that good. The landing page conversion, not that great. The CPL, a little bit high, right? Cost per group member, a little bit high. But remember, at the end of the day, what we really and truly care about is looking at the outputs, right? So maybe everything is high over here, but it's just giving us some very good quality leads. And each of those leads, ends up booking a call, they end up showing up to their appointment, and then end up becoming a customer, right? If that's the case, hey, I will pay $1,000 per lead if that means that each of them is going to become a customer, and if I'm selling a unit that's like $5,800 or something like that, right? Hypothetically, I'm just giving you an example. So I will pay $500 a lead, right? Remember, the KPI for lead is you're paying $10 a lead. I would pay $50 a lead. I would pay $100 a lead, right? If each of those leads was to convert and I had 100% certainty that they were so high quality, I would pay that because, again, remember, it's about the deeper funnel metrics, right? And so this is going to be where if you're only looking at the lead gen metrics through one eye, through the crack in your finger, right? And you accidentally turn off an ad or an ad set that is actually doing well later on down the road, you might actually end up screwing yourself because you are not actually looking at the whole picture. Now, again, this does depend on if you have advanced tracking set up. So there is some technological setup for this, right? So you got to go ahead and kind of have, like, every time there's a unit, you got to go ahead and have a workflow inside of TCK that sets up. So that way that information is sent back over to the actual ad platforms. Okay, so it's a little bit of a more advanced setup. If we need so, we will go ahead and have a tech tutorial for this. But right now, I just want to plant the seeds on the high level of how all of this actually works. So that way you can kind of understand, even if it's theoretical right now, I want you to understand the point and the principle that we are talking about, which is that the deeper metrics, the deeper strategy metrics are what ultimately trump and what actually end up mattering. And so this is the reason why when we talked about acquisition metrics and we talked about profitability metrics, right? What we are doing is we are looking at, cool, hey, maybe there's an ad that has amazing CAC. If that's the case, guess what we should do? We should keep on spending on the ad, even if that means, hey, maybe our click cost is a little bit high, maybe our KPIs for clicks is a little bit high, maybe our KPI for CPL is maybe not that good, right? Maybe it's a little bit high, but it's just really quality traffic. However, you can also have sometimes the opposite, where sometimes, beginners, and I remember we got really excited about this a long time ago as well, when we first started out, was like, yo, we're getting leads right now that are like, $1 leads or $2 leads or like $3 leads, which is like dirt cheap. Like, we're getting super cheap leads. Like, our lead gen is doing amazing. And then the quality on those leads is just like horrendous, like terrible. Like, they don't actually convert into customers and they're just terrible quality leads, right? So it's not only about trying to optimize for cost per lead, right? Because a lot of people get stuck in like, cool, I'm just going to optimize for cost per lead. Like, I'm going to go ahead and see how low I can get cost per lead no matter what. No, right? You want to say within that KPI, yes, but even if, ultimately what you're looking at is you want to look at the overall machine. Hey, I'm okay spending $1 leads. $1 leads doesn't necessarily mean that it's low quality traffic, but if I look at the deeper funnel metrics and I look at the deeper kind of strategy metrics and I see like, hey, what's going on here is that these are dollar leads and they're not converting. In that case, then yes, I would say that's not good quality traffic. But if it's $1 lead and they're converting, hey, I got the best of both worlds. I got cheap leads and I'm converting all those leads. Like, that's an amazing thing to have, right? But at the end of the day, you got to understand the nuance because details matter around this topic. And this is where a lot of people sometimes don't even understand how important this topic is, because what it is possible to do is like, you could go out there and say, you know what, if I'm going to only look at, let's say, my lead gen metrics, and I'm going to optimize to getting my cost per lead as low as possible, right? Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't get ads that are within KPI. I'm not saying that. But sometimes if you're like, cool, I'm going to optimize for this only one metric, right? It is possible, like at the surface level, you might be doing amazing over here, but then downstream, when you look at your profitability metrics, you look at your acquisition metrics, it's a complete mess and you just mess everything up, right? And so you can be in a situation where your lead cost is, let's say $15 per lead, and you have a CAC that's well within KPI, but then all of a sudden you bring your CPL, down to like $10 or $5, and now your CAC triples. Sometimes it works like that, right? And so you got to kind of think about this, as you run traffic, as you kind of think about this deeper and deeper, as you get more and more experience with this, you're going to come across this to be able to really look at the deeper funnel metrics. And again, there is some tech setup that's involved with this to be able to get that data back over to the ad platforms if you are using some advanced tracking features on there. But that's ultimately the principle that you want to understand here, right? And let me just go ahead and show you some examples of what we mean by this, right? So again, this is just straight up example data. But in terms of between these two scenarios, right, where you have, let's say, a cost per lead and you have an ad set that is giving you a cost per lead of, let's say, $15, but these metrics are within KPI, or these metrics are outside of KPI and you're getting a good CPL. In this case, if the deepest metric that I have is cost per lead, understand this very carefully. If the deepest metric that I have is cost per lead, which in this case, in this example, let's say, for example, the max of my tech capability that I have in my ad platform is to be able to measure cost per lead. If that is the case, right, I can't see any other metrics down the road, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to optimize for the deepest metric that I have, which in this case is cost per lead, right? And for all of you, cost per lead is going to 100% be, no matter what your tech setup, if you follow the basic one that we have, cost per lead will be shown for you inside of your ads platform, right? So in this case, I would shoot for this specific ad set, and I would keep this one alive, and I would probably X this one if I don't need the lead flow for it, right? Because of the fact that the deepest metric that I have is what I am optimizing for. I don't care if this is outside of KPI. What I'm looking for is if this is within KPI, then this ad set is good. If the deepest metric is not within KPI, then I am not okay with that, right? So I don't care about these like vanity, superficial metrics over here. I'm looking at the deepest metric that I have for that specific ad, for that specific ad set. Does that make sense? Very important. Let me go ahead and give you another example. Let's say, for example, you do have the advanced tracking setup in which you are able to attribute back to the ad set and back to the ad exactly the customer and the call. Now, again, that requires a lot more tech setup and a lot more kind of advanced tracking, okay? So again, if we need the tech tutorials, we can always make those. However, you just want to understand the principle. Whatever the deepest metric that I have available is, whether that be cost per lead, whether that be cost per, scheduled call, whether that be, cost per acquisition, whatever that is going to be the metric that I'm optimizing the ads for. And so if it was down to, let's say, for example, I have ad 1, okay, I have ad 1 and I have ad 2, okay? And in the actual ads dashboard, right? So I'm going to be looking at my ads dashboard and I'm looking at the columns and I'm seeing, hey, I got ad 1 and I got ad 2. In this case, ad 1 is doing phenomenal for CTR all, CTR link click, CPL. Wow, this is phenomenal, right? The superficial earlier on metrics are doing phenomenal. But then down the road, they're not doing that hot, right? Versus I have another ad over here, superficial early metrics, not good, terrible. Cost per lead, high, not that great. But then the deeper funnel metrics, because in this case, I have advanced tracking set up and I'm able to attribute back the deeper funnel metrics to the actual ad in the ad set. In this case, I'm like, oh man, I don't care if these, superficial vanity metrics in the beginning are higher than they should be. Because I can see that, this ad is producing for me customers at exactly the KPI that I'm looking for. Keep running the ad. That's the point here. The deepest metric that you have available for you in your actual ads manager, in your actual ads dashboard, in your attribution, that is what you are optimizing for when you are doing judgment day, okay? That is very, very, very important. Now, if you do have the capability to optimize around acquisition and profitability metrics, then by all means do that. If you do not, right, because there's tech setup involved, all that kind of stuff, then if the max that you have is cost per lead, optimize for cost per lead like we did in the previous example, right? Here, let me go ahead and give you an even more extreme example over here. Again, requires some tech setup on here. But in this case, we have amazing, right? And again, if I'm able to use that advanced tracking to get that attribution of this customer back over to the actual ad, right? This is ad 1 and this is ad 2. In that case, I would say, oh man, my CAC for this ad is not within KPI. Again, remember, over a statistically significant amount of data. I can't be like, I ran the ad for like one day and I looked at it and it wasn't doing good. No. I'm talking about statistically significant data, a big enough sample size of like, hey, I ran the ad for 5-10 days. I took enough calls to be able to determine that the call performance was good, but the lead quality just wasn't there. Well, in that case, this ad compared to this metric sucks, this metric sucks, this metric sucks, this metric sucks, this metric sucks. Oh, but wait a second, the CAC, and it's statistically significant that I have enough volume there to be able to say, wait a second, this is actually something that is a good ad set because it's producing for me customers at the end of the day that are within KPI. Does that make sense? Okay, so again, the deepest metric that you have available in your ads dashboard is what you are going to be optimizing for. If you have the capability to optimize around acquisition, cost per acquisition, CAC, that kind of stuff, and you can attribute that back to the exact ad in the exact ad set, then by all means, optimize around that. If you can attribute calls, by all means, optimize around that. If you can attribute leads, by all means, optimize around that. You're optimizing around the deepest metric that you have available for you. And so now you can see when we talk about deeper metrics, that's what we're talking about when we talk about acquisition metrics and profitability metrics, right? And now the question, I've answered this a gazillion and 2 times already, but I'm going to go ahead and hit it again. If we do not have access to those deeper metrics, then of course we make the decisions based on the most amount of data that we do have. And so if the deepest metrics that we have are only the lead gen metrics, maybe group members, maybe leads, whatever that might be, we go ahead and optimize and make decisions around that. That is going to be the most important thing. Does that make sense? All of this entire explanation that we just went over right now was to go ahead and explain just rule number 3 around there, which is that deeper funnel metrics always win, okay? So when we talk about daily management and we talk about daily judgment day and all that kind of stuff, right? This is what I wanted to talk about because a lot of people don't understand. They're like, cool, I'm going to optimize around, like CTR. But yes, you can optimize around CTR. Don't get me wrong. If that's like, CTR is a good metric to optimize around. But ultimately, you need to make sure you are not just pigeonholing yourself. You need to look at the entire thing so that way you're understanding exactly what is going on here, okay? Now, having said that, as we start to close out this specific training section, then we'll get into a step-by-step around daily judgment day. I want to go and talk to you about the mindset of daily management and judgment day because many of the people who are just starting out in online advertising, they don't understand that running paid advertising is like being a scientist. It's like having your own laboratory of like live specimens, which are like ad sets, okay? And what you're doing is you're kind of like breeding and genetically splicing together to be able to find these winners based off of the variables. And the DNA that we're splicing together are these variables around like, cool, what is going to be the exact combination of audience targeting, creative, headline, and copy that is going to yield for me a winner in the ecosystem, and the ecosystem is going to be the marketplace, aka the Meta Facebook ads marketplace, right? And so as a scientist, what we're doing is we're being extremely methodical and testing our hypotheses within each of these. So we're like, cool, I said this in my creative, in the hook of my creative, I said this. In the hook of my copy, I said this to this audience. How did that resonate? What is the combination of that? And how did that actually come out? So we're looking for the combination that is likely to yield the highest probability of success based off of the actual variables that we are testing. And then once we found what that kind of genetic specimen is, right, between the combinations, our job is to now keep it healthy and then actually duplicate it, right? So when the actual, like, you know how they do like breeding for cows and like cattle and that kind of stuff, right? Like when they get a specimen that is like DNA superior, you know, genetically superior than the rest of them, what they do is they don't wait until it gets old and it's about to die and then say, cool, now we're going to go ahead and breed it with the other, you know, cattle or whatever the other specimens that we're doing. No, when it's at the healthiest it could be is when they actually breed it, so that way they can get more of that specific, you know, unique combination that we have. And so that is why we go ahead and duplicate while it's healthy, and then we turn off all of the unhealthy ones, the losing ad sets. So we have this ecosystem inside of our ads manager that is healthy as always. So this is the mindset that we must have when we are running paid traffic, which is that we got to be like a scientist, right? This is the reason why we got to be meticulous in the notes and the steps that we take, so that way we're not getting emotional. We're actually checking our hypotheses. We're actually testing what we got to do, right? This scientific mindset is what we are applying really to the entire daily management process as a whole, not just daily judgment day, but also when we talk about tracking profitability, right? Daily reporting, consistent ad work. We're all applying that mindset around being that scientist is so very important. Being that calculator, kind of like, you know, imagine like you have your left brain, right brain. I mean, that's been debunked a while back, but point being is like, you know, there's parts of your brain that are more analytical. That is the part of your brain that we are using when we are actually running online advertising, paid advertising, that kind of stuff. Okay. Now, with that being said, what we will do is we will go ahead and jump into a step-by-step for daily judgment day. It's going to be extremely similar to the daily judgment day that we have done previously when we talked about launching. However, we'll go ahead and add some additional points to that and just maybe be a review for you as well. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and cut over to a split screen that's going to show you the step-by-step for daily judgment day. All right, welcome to this step-by-step walkthrough on daily judgment day. Now, this is going to be very similar to what we have done in the past regarding judgment days, right? So we're kind of just overall looking at the health of the actual ads that we are running. So this is going to primarily be taking place inside of the ads manager. Now, the other thing that we have gone ahead and touched on in the other mini trainings as well is taking notes, right? So however you want to take notes, whether that be on, you know, Evernote or ClickUp or, you know, whatever, wherever you want to take these notes, right? So let's say, for example, we're doing it on ClickUp. Again, just as an example, do not take this literally, just showing you as an example, right? We can have, cool, we have our 4-7 evaluation. Earlier on, we talked about profitability, right? So if I wanted to go ahead and kind of annotate this, I could say this was for profitability. And then if I wanted to go ahead and say, cool, now I'm going to go ahead and look at the actual ads and see what's going on here. I might come over here and say, cool, now what we're going to do, we want to make sure we have daily reporting and tracking profitability done. And now we're going to go ahead and see, okay, cool, we have our date over here. Now, again, this is just example data. You're probably not going to have these filters over here. This is just an example data, right? And what we're doing here is we're kind of just looking at, okay, how are these ads performing? Now, instead of looking at the global view, right, where we're looking at all of the kind of summation of these and we're adding that into our master tracking sheet, now what we're doing is we're actually looking at the individual data and the individual ads to see, hey, how is this actually performing? Now, in this case, we got IFPA, we got ACE, we got IFPA, we got NASM. Obviously, these all have different creatives and copy with them as well, but they're all running to very similar audiences on there. So we're just kind of observing, right? Like, hey, okay, cool. How much have we spent so far? But we're going to not only observe on the day, but we're also going to observe over a 3-day period, right? So we're going to say, cool, from the 16th to the 18th, right? So we're going to say, cool, over those 3 days, let's look at the data and what that looks like. So over here, we'll see, cool, you know, we spent 16, 26 over here. We're looking at the budgets over here. We see the impressions, 57, 72, 58, 50. So already what I'm seeing is that these CPMs are really, really high. So that's already a level of concern. Now, this one over here, 36, that's within range, right? We're looking typically around $30 CPM. So I'm already very concerned when I see the CPMs that are very high around here. Now, it is also important to note that this example data over here is from November. So typically in Q4 is the last quarter of the year. So we're talking about October, November, December, the last 3 months of the year. CPMs and ad costs typically do rise because it is the holiday season. And so a lot of people are spending a lot more money on ads. And when I say a lot of people, I don't mean consumers. I'm talking about companies, right? So people are looking to, Black Friday sales and that kind of stuff. And then specifically looking at November 16th to 18th, right around around that Thanksgiving time, we might see some CPMs rise. So if this continued as a trend, going into December, then I would be concerned to say, okay, you know what? My CPMs are pretty high. It might be because my creative isn't that good. My audiences are a little bit competitive. So that might be a little bit of a concern there, right? So when I'm looking at CTR all over here, CTR all, remember, I'm aiming for about 3%. But again, this might just be a vanity metric depending on what the deeper funnel metrics look like, right? So I might decide to skip over and look at my deeper funnel metrics first and say, cool, let's look at our cost per lead. It looks like that is the deepest funnel metric that we have on here right now. But again, $15, not the best over here, right? This one, not too bad, not too shabby, right? So even though if I go over here and look at over here, even though the CTR all is 1.18 and I'm looking for about a 3%, hey, I'm getting leads for $7, so that's not terrible. My CTR link click, I'm looking for about 1.5%, 1%, right? It's right on the border there. And so even though, these are not that hot, it does look like the, cost per result for the cost per lead is, pretty decent. Over here, these are really starting to get out of KPI here, right? So what I might end up doing here on the judgment day, as I'm flipping between time frames, I might also be taking notes over here. It's going to be very important. So I might say, you know what, as I'm noticing this, and this is where having the notes on the other screen are going to be very helpful, because switching these tabs is not good, because what's going to happen here is that I'm going to have to kind of look at what's going on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually drag this here, put this over like such. And again, it's very annoying because I'm on the recording side over here, but over here I might just say, you know what, IFBA, and then this is don't waste on, and this is free course shows. This one is giving me leads for $7, even though CTR all is only at, what was it at? It was at 1.18%, right? So 1.18%. And then I might also decide to say, you know what, not doing so hot. And then I might just go in and say, IFBA, don't waste on sweating image. That one isn't doing so hot. It's giving me leads right now on this frame. And this is, of course, at the time frame. I might even decide to put time frame over here. This is going to be November 16th to the 18th, November 16th to the 18th. Because remember, this data is going to change as we look at different time frames, right? So if I say, cool, instead of showing me 16th to 18th, show me 15th to the 19th, you'll see that, okay, wait a second. So this IFBA that was at $7 is now at $9. And then over here, these cost per results have gone significantly higher. And then if I look at the CTR all, it's changed, right? So when you change the time frame, the data over here is also changing, right? And so it's good and important to go ahead and annotate the time frame that we are looking at. And then we're going to switch between the different time frames, right? So now normally I could just use last 7 days, look at yesterday, look at today. I could use these to look at maximum, look at last 30 days. However, if I click on this, obviously right now the date that I'm doing this actual recording is going to be last 7 days, is going to take me over to 2023, 2024, something like that, right? So what I want to do is I'm just going to go ahead and select different days on here so you can see, but you can go ahead and mess around with these over here and look at the different time frames as well, right? So let's say, for example, I was going to look at the 15th to the 24th. Let's look at what that looks like. So you'll see that all of these ad costs are really starting to rise as I go ahead and expand this time frame. So in this case, I would say, you know what? It's looking like a lot of these ads are not that hot. They're not doing so good, right? And if I look at the CPMs, I believe, oh man, $40, $50 CPMs I'm looking at. I'm looking at CTR alls and, significantly under 3%. I'm looking at CTR link clicks significantly under 1%, 0.97, but it's on the border over there, but it's definitely not 1.15%. So 1.5% looking around there. Cost per lead on here isn't doing so hot either. Now, obviously, if I wanted to go ahead and see deeper funnel metrics, that is something that I could set up as a workflow inside of the CRM with TCK, right? I could go ahead and do that. Now, if I did that, I would actually need to go in and the columns, I would need to go ahead and customize the columns to actually include standard events. I would have to go ahead and include some of those different events on here, because right now I have cost per result. And so if I wanted to see, hey, I want to see maybe applications, I want to see customers, I want to see purchases, I want to see that kind of stuff, I'm going to have to change the columns to represent that so I could see some of those deeper funnel metrics, right? So right now the deepest funnel metric I have is the cost per lead, but then I could set up the columns to show up if I had the workflow shooting to be able to see the customers in there. But overall, just looking at just only the lead generation metrics, it does look like these ads are not doing too hot. And so definitely I would be potentially shutting off some of these winners, right? So turning off some of these winners, but again, making sure that I abide by the rules. So ad sets must be mature. I got to judge based off of at least a 3-day, 72-hour ad set. Deeper funnel metrics always win. So whatever the deepest funnel metric I have. So in this case, if I'm not going to go through the tech tutorials to set those deeper funnel metrics up, which now I'll be honest, probably 8 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10 times, we're kind of just basing it off of cost per lead inside of the dashboard, especially when it comes to things like community strategy. So mainly cost per lead is what we're basing basing it off of. So just looking at this, and then never mess with the winner. So if we had to mess with the winner, we wouldn't mess with it. If we had any winners on here, we would go ahead and take that opportunity to go ahead and duplicate and scale. So again, we've talked about this in the past, but let's say hypothetically, this was a winner. What we could do is we could go ahead and duplicate that. And we say, cool, we're going to duplicate that in the original campaign. And then we're going to have maybe one winner, right? One duplicate. And we're going to duplicate this. And right now, this one on here is sitting at a budget of $10 per day, right? So I might decide to duplicate this, put it in the original campaign, and I might go in here and duplicate it at maybe $20, or I might duplicate it at $30 or something like that, right? So that's what that might look like in terms of duplicating and scaling the winners if I had any. And then obviously we're going to go ahead and test some new things as well using what we have in our unproven bank, right? Our unproven bank is our test bank. You're going to learn more about that in the consistent ad work. And we might go ahead and test some new, and especially in this case, because just looking at all of these ads and these numbers, these are not doing too hot. And so I might decide to scrap the entire thing and just work on, some of the learnings that I have from that. I'm obviously going to be looking at some of the notes that I've taken and just saying, hey, you know what? Overall, these ads are not doing so hot. We had the hypothesis right over here. We had the hypothesis of wanting to test over here November gift and free course. The copy for these is not doing so good. What might I want to test next, right? So I might ask myself a question over here, kind of just externally processing this. Might want to keep the audience the same, because I don't think the audience might be the issue, but it might be more so around the copy and the creative around these specific things. So these are images, and if we go over here to the ads, you'll see that these are some images, and maybe they're not so hot, maybe they're not converting as well, and those are all things that we might be annotating as we go along. And so that way, if you jump on a coaching call, get on a masterclass, get on a hot seat, whatever that might look like for you to get support, you have your notes, and if your coach asks you, hey, go ahead and pull up your notes, let's go ahead and look at what's going on, where's your performance, where's everything looking like, you have something to be able to show and say, cool, hey, these are the audiences that I'm testing, this is what's happening with my creative, this is what's happening with my copy, these are what my numbers look like, right? This is my CTR all, my CTR link click, my cost per lead, my CPMs are around this right now. You have all of this data that allows you to then be able to step back, have some thinking time, do some problem solving to be able to evaluate what the bottlenecks in the business are, so that way you can actually take it to the next level. So that is what all of that looks like in terms of the step-by-step for Daily Judgment Day in the daily management process. Obviously, this is going to be a process and a system that takes multiple reps for you to acquire, because there are so many nuances and details and pro tips. But again, it's all about the reps, and you will acquire the skills once you actually put the repetition in and do this on a regular daily basis. And it's going to give you an understanding, oh yeah, I did this in the past, this worked, XYZ, along with your notes. So with that being said, let's go and cut back over to the main training. All right, welcome back from that step-by-step for the Daily Judgment Day split screen. So again, it's going to be very, very, very similar to what we did in the launching, but just as a recap, that's kind of what we're doing on an ongoing daily process to just kind of make sure that, hey, this laboratory, this ecosystem that we are running, we are keeping it healthy. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, this has been step number 3 of the daily management process. So we've already talked about daily reporting, then we track the profitability, we zoom out, then we zoom in to the actual ads, and we do the Daily Judgment Day process, right? Turn off the losers, duplicate, scale the winners, test the new, and we'll talk more about testing the new when we talk about the consistent ad work. But if you do have any questions about this specific training, anything that we discussed, make sure you go ahead and drop it inside the student community, so that way one of the community members can go ahead and help you over there. But other than that, we got one more training that we got to get into. So with that being said, we will catch you in the next training section. All right, team, welcome to this training section. Step number 4, consistent ad work of the entire daily management for profitable acquisition process. We've already gone ahead and talked about daily reporting. We've talked about tracking profitability. We've talked about Daily Judgment Day, as well as we're going to now talk about consistent ad work and exactly what that means as the 4th step of this entire daily management process. So what is consistent ad work? So as we've already talked about in the previous section, entropy is going to take over for your ads. A winner is not going to be a winner forever. It is eventually going to become a loser, okay? And so like everything else in the universe, because it's all going towards decay, unless there is an outside hand, unless there is outside intervention, we have to make sure that we are constantly in the background doing the work that is required to be ready for that degradation that is going to happen for our winning assets. So what that means is that we need to have a proven bank of winners for copy, creative, audiences, and headlines that are ready for us to launch. And that means that we need to be able to test all of these variables in like a small ecosystem to be able to see, hey, what is going to be the winners that we can then run in the future when our current winners end up not working anymore. Now, by far, the most important, bank to be able to have is going to be a bank of copy and creative. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in just a second. But you want to really understand, like, hey, why is consistent ad work important? Okay. 2 major reasons. Number 1, ad fatigue. Okay. Your ads, no matter how great they are, no matter how much of a winner they are, like we said, they will eventually stop working. That's because of ad fatigue. Ad fatigue basically means that the people that you are putting the ads in front of are going to have banner blindness. All the people that were going to respond to the ad have already done so. And so as a result of that, what's going to happen is that the new people, they're not going to want to respond to that specific ad. Maybe they didn't resonate with the hook, maybe the creative, maybe the copy, whatever it is, there's going to become ad fatigue. And so over time, your ad is going to perform less and less and less and less. And so this is the first reason why consistent ad work is so important. So that way we can allocate a small percentage of our budget, our daily budget, to test in the background and basically create this bank of winners, right? So first we got to have this bank of like testing things, right? Like unproven, right? So this bank of unproven. And then after that, we're going to have this bank of winners that we're going to test that are going to be proven that we can then deploy whenever we want, right? And then reason number 2 is to really go out there and outperform the current winner. So even if we have ads that are converting within KPI, that might not be the best that we could get, right? So let's say, for example, we got a cost per lead of $10. We might be able to get it something at like $8. Let's say we got a CAC of like, I don't know, let's say like $200, $300, right? We might be able to get a better CAC with a better ad. And so that's the reason why we're continuously testing and really making sure that we can maximize the performance of these ads as much as possible, okay? Now, before I walk you through what the general recommendations are in terms of ad copy, creative, audience, headline, that kind of stuff, I do have another big recommendation here, which is going to be the swipe file recommendation when it comes to consistent ad work, okay? Do you remember our good old friend, the swipe file? Well, our friend right over here is going to play a big part in our consistent ad work, similar to the first time that we developed our copy and our creative, right? The first time we developed it, how much did we leverage it? A lot. And so the same way, when we are doing our consistent ad work on a regular daily basis, we need to make sure that we are studying the marketplace. Before we put together new copy, new creative, new target, new headlines, it's going to be so much easier if we are actually pulling examples from other people in our marketplace, or maybe even other places that are not in our marketplace, right? Like maybe you see an ad of somebody who's selling shirts and you're like, dude, that hook, that frame, that angle was awesome. I'm going to go ahead and use that in my market. And you can absolutely learn a lot just by doing that. And so this is just a reminder, you are playing within a marketplace, and so you don't want to close up shop or, close your windows, close your door, and then just go in and say, cool, I'm going to have what do we call it back in the day? Creative orgasm, right? We said no creative orgasms, right? And so this is what we're talking about here. The swipe file is going to be very important because it's going to make it so much easier. And so if you have not been studying somebody else in the marketplace, right, I would highly recommend find somebody who's extremely successful in the marketplace that you want to be in and literally just study the heck out of them, okay? Literally use them as the keystone example in which you're going to go ahead and model that and then put your own spice messaging on top of that, right? And then obviously study other people in different marketplaces as well, but you're going to need that swipe file. Otherwise, you're going to really struggle putting together new copy, new creative, new audiences, and all of the other pieces when it comes to that, okay? So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the 4 ad pieces that you are going to be working on consistently. And those ad pieces, and this is basically how it's going to work, pretty much every day, every week, regularly, you're going to be working on new ad copy, new ad creative, audiences, and headlines, and you're going to be putting that into an unproven bank, okay? So you have your unproven bank over here, okay? And then what we're going to do in just a second, we'll talk about, you're going to allocate a very small percentage of your budget to be able to test those unproven bank, to be able to then have your proven bank, okay? But you can't, the proven bank and the testing with the small percentage, this is super easy. Like this stuff over here, super easy. The part that's going to take the most amount of time is actually developing that unproven bank of ad copy and creative and headlines and audiences that are ready to actually be tested for, okay? So that is going to be the first piece that we're going to go ahead and talk about is the ad copy recommendation, okay? This is going to be the first part that needs probably the most attention intensive, kind of what's going to take you time to dedicate time towards actually putting together every week. And so our recommendation is to be putting into your saved bank at least 1 to 3 pieces of quality copy that you are writing every single week. Now, can you get away with maybe 3 to 5 pieces of copy per month? Maybe, right? Like depending on how fast you're getting through this, depending on how big your audience size is, depending on how big your budget is, there's a lot of nuance here, right? I can't just make a general recommendation like, hey, everybody has to be making, 1 to 3 pieces of new copy every single week, because it just depends on like how much are you spending and how fast are they burning out and how good are the existing winners that you have. Because if you got a really good winner, you might be able to go ahead and float that for a while. And there's a lot of nuance to this. However, I would say, and I feel pretty confident in saying that, like, if you're not working on at least 3 to 5 new pieces of copy per month, at least, I'm talking about this is like bare minimum, right? If you're not doing that, then I would say for sure you are going to end up in a very, very difficult and tight situation, because you're not going to have enough ad copy in your unproven bank to then be able to test later on. Because remember, your ad copy also then becomes the foundation of your video script that you use later on for your creative. And so the ad copy is very attention intensive, but it's very important to do, right? And so this is what we would say. If you are struggling with lead generation, you need to make sure that you are allocating dedicated time every single day to working on your copywriting, okay? This is the reason why it's literally a part of the daily management process. So that way you can allocate time that you need in order to do the ad work and actually get better at it, right? So we've talked about many different resources in the ad copy training previously around, hey, how can you actually get better at copywriting? And so there's a lot of resources. All you got to do is you got to put in the dang work to actually get better at that skill and identify as a copywriter, right? And so not to mention using your swipe file. If you have a very good swipe file, it's going to be very easy for you to just be able to model other successful players in the marketplace or even a different marketplace that you are going ahead and using in your swipe file regularly, right? So bottom line is this: if you show up on a coaching call and you say, hey, I'm struggling with my lead generation, okay? Our number one question, every coach's number one question, community members' number one question is going to be, hey, are you dedicating the consistent ad work that is required to get better at the skills of becoming a copywriter, right? The chances are that your ad copy is not that great if you're really struggling with lead generation, okay? So you got to put in the dang work to identify and become the version of yourself that is a copywriter and learn those skills, right? And so instead of being, hey, I'm going to be this limbic person who's riding this roller coaster of thoughts and emotions, I'm like, man, life is terrible. I'm a terrible copywriter. Leads are not working. I'm never going to make money in this career. This profession is too difficult. I can't do this. Of course, we all have those days, right? However, you just want to make sure that you are not riding that roller coaster as much as possible, externally processed. This is the reason why I'm a very big fan of accountability partners, external processors, support systems, right? People who are especially in the same game as you, who can provide you that kind of, hey, we all go through it. It's kind of like having entrepreneur therapy is sometimes what we call it. You need to just be able to talk to other entrepreneurs so that way, hey, things are tough sometimes. This is the game of entrepreneurship. I'm telling you right now, it's difficult, right? But guess what? It's what makes the result so much worthwhile, because we know for a fact that so few people out there are able to play this game and actually be successful with it. And so you actually just got to dedicate and be resilient to it, right? And so that is ultimately what the difference between a entrepreneur and a professional entrepreneur is I remember back when I used to be an entrepreneur, right? Years and years and years ago, is that the reason I was an entrepreneur was because I would get stuck in my head. I would think too much. I would get down on myself. But then as soon as I started building a support system, right? I got a business partner. They were able to handle one side of the equation. I was able to handle the other side of the equation. I had somebody to talk to. I built a support system of other entrepreneurs in my system, right? Then I was able to go ahead and further stop getting in my head and just do the dang work that was required for me to develop the skills and the identity in order to then become the professional entrepreneur. And you will hear the same story over and over and over again from every other professional entrepreneur as well, right? It's all about doing the dang work to develop your skills and your identity. However, we get in our own heads and we get down on ourselves. And so having that support system is very important. And then putting in the work to actually develop the skill that may be a deficiency and maybe a deficit, specifically around being able to come up with ad copy regularly. Okay, so that is the first piece when it comes to consistent ad work, is going to be putting in the work necessary in order to create those new pieces of ad copy on a regular basis. Piece number 2 is the ad creative. Now, similarly to ad copy, the second, if not arguably, it's up there with number 1, that is the most attention intensive, is creating ad creative. Now, our recommendation, again, like with ad copy, is to create 1 to 3 quality pieces of new creative every single week. But again, maybe you could get away with 3 to 5 pieces per month. Maybe, again, highly dependent on your ad spend, your current ads, your new winner. If you got no winners right now, dude, I'm telling you, if you hop on a coaching call, dude or dudette, like if you hop on a coaching call, you hop on with a coach and you got no winners right now and you are struggling with lead generation, you better freaking be making like 1 to 3, 5 copies a day of ad copy and creative. So because you got to work on the dang craft and actually get better at creating copy that is proven. That is the goal, right? So if you're sucking at it, you got to put more time and attention into it so that way you can actually get good at it. And then once you get good at it, then obviously it's going to be easier for you to be able to do that behind the scenes. But again, if you're struggling with lead generation, you got to put in the work in order to actually get good at it every single day, right? And this could be either videos or images, right? So we're talking about, hey, you want to crank out a whole bunch of different images that you would like to test. Make sure you're taking notes, kind of putting your hypotheses together, all that kind of stuff. Very, very, very important, right? Now, of course, when it comes to videos, it might be a little bit more difficult. You might have to script out the video and then just have like a shoot day, right? Or like a shoot month or something like that, like at the end of 1 week in the month or something like that, right? Depends, right? Depends on what your output is going to be, depending on your resources. Down the road, there's even resources that we can introduce to you in terms of team members. That's very, very easy to be able to have freelancers at a very, 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 very affordable rate to be able to handle a lot of that editing for you. All you got to do is record the script and then take it off from there, right? And so not to mention being able to use your swipe file to be able to then just model other successful players in the marketplace. It makes it extremely easy for you to be able to go ahead and crank out that consistent ad work related to creative, okay? But the only thing that you got to do is you just got to take it very seriously, okay? This is the reason why it's a part of the daily management process. You can embody that identity of being that marketer, being that person who can create the copy and the creative instead of being down on yourself, exactly the same that we talked about earlier, right? It's not about being down on yourself. It's not about, oh man, I can't create ad creative. I'm a terrible person. This is going to be so terrible. Don't worry. We've all been there. It happens to us. Use the support system, right? This is the reason why you're a part of it. Like, people in your family may not understand. They might even think you're being a weirdo for trying to make money online and all this kind of stuff, right? Point being is you need to surround yourself with other people who are on the same journey. This is why accountability partners, pods, support systems, business partners, all of these helps so much. And so I would urge you to be able to reach out and make sure that you are able to set that up. And hey, drop a post in the student community, right? Maybe this is something that you're like, yo, hey, you guys, if you guys can facilitate this, right? If the program itself, can you guys help us, match us up into accountability? Can you put us into pods? Can you, help us find business partners? Like, if that is something that you're interested in, share that. Communicate that, right? Like, don't hold it in, because if you're really struggling, nobody's going to know unless you actually reach out for that support, so we can help make sure that you get the support that you are looking for. Okay. So that is going to be ad piece number 2, which is ad creative. Let's go ahead and talk about the audience targeting recommendation. Now, this one is going to be a little bit more lax, right? Because it's something that you don't have to do as consistently as copy and creative, because copy and creative are really the big ones. This is probably something like 1 to 2 hours, like per month. You could probably bang out like, 10 or 30 new audiences that you could literally have in your bank that are ready to test, right? And obviously looking at your competitors and all of that kind of stuff. So I would say that out of all of what we talked about so far, audience targeting so far is the easiest. It's very, very, very easy to just have your spreadsheet, right? We've already had your targeting spreadsheet that we went ahead and walked you through in a previous training section. And all you do is just boom, 10 or 30 new audiences. And then you have this entire unproven bank that you can now go ahead and test and then get that into your proven bank over time as well. And then finally, we got the headline recommendation. This is, again, another piece, just like audience targeting, which is probably one of the easiest ones to go ahead and bang out. You can literally even just use AI nowadays to do like 50 to 80% of the work and bust out some like 10 to 30 really good headlines very, 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 very quickly in just one session, right? And then what you'll find is that, cool, one headline, honestly, once you just find like 1 to 5 really good headlines, they last you like forever. And so like, I would say if you were to go ahead and talk about like, hey, which ones have the longest time that you need to, renew them, is like, okay, creative definitely gets expired the fastest. Then after that, copy gets expired the fastest. Then after that, targeting. And then after that, headline. But headline and targeting, those things are really kind of evergreen, because once you find some really good ones, you just got to go ahead and make sure that you are changing up your copy and creative regularly. So that way it just stays fresh over and over and over again. Beautiful. Now that we've talked about each of those 4 pieces, we're now going to actually talk about testing, right? So if you remember, we don't actually have a diagram for this, but I'll show you what this looks like, right? So everything we just talked about is doing the consistent ad work that was necessary in order to have your unproven bank, okay? So you do all of the recommendations that we talked about above, okay, in order to get into your unproven bank. From your unproven bank, what you're then going to do is you're going to allocate a small percentage of your budget. We're talking about very small, like once a week, once every other week. All you're doing is behind the scenes. You just want to make sure you have at least one test that is going, like put $20 behind it, whatever it might be, in order to go ahead and test and see if it becomes a proven one. If it doesn't become a proven, you scrap it, you take notes, you say, okay, this is why it wasn't proven, X, Y, Z, whatever. But then if you get something that's a winner, you put it in your proven bank and then you turn it off, okay? Because you already have winners, right? You can't handle any more. You have all these winners over here. You probably can't handle any more lead flow. So you turn it off, but you know that the combination that you have is a winner. And so then when your winners start to decline, and if you don't want to duplicate these winners, right, you're going to go ahead and test some more. Well, guess what? You have these proven banks that you can now deploy as your winners start to decline. I hope that makes sense, right? And so same thing here. We talk about testing, consistent ad work. We're going to talk about the proven bank over here. Once you have that bank of potential copy, creative, audiences, headline, that kind of stuff, okay? Now it's time to actually test them. And the goal here is that we want to make sure that we are actually getting that bank of proven variables. We don't want just like a potential random bank of like copy and creative that I think might work. We want to have a bank of proven winners that we can then just pull out of whenever we actually want. And so again, like we said, we're going to go ahead and put a very small percentage of our budget, maybe every week, to testing out one new variable. So we could spend maybe, let's say, $20 to $100 per month to just test something new. Now, again, this is dependent on scale, right? So in our case, like for example, our testing budget, sometimes we'll spend like $500, $1,000 maybe per week, or sometimes even per day, just to test something new out. But that's obviously because we have resources behind us, right? So there's a nuance to this. I wouldn't say that this is like a rule that it's like $20 to $100 per month. I would say in the beginning when you're starting out, that's kind of where you start out, and then you kind of scale as you go around. But that's really what it would take in order to make sure that in the background you are doing that consistent ad work. But you're only going to be able to do that test to find the proven ones unless you are actually first doing the dang work that is required and actually build that bank up, right? And then in terms of bigger levels to test actually, right? So you can always test out new audiences, new creative, headline, copy. There's other variables you can test as well, placement and devices. A lot of times I would say that creative is probably one of the biggest levers. Audience, once you find a good audience, like we were talking about earlier, once you find a good audience, that'll last you. Like this is kind of like an evergreen thing, right? But creative for sure was going to get burnt out the fastest. Headline as well, like headline, if you find a couple good ones, that one can last you a while, but like creative, and then I would say copy, then headline, then audience, right? And then other variables you can always test, like, cool, I want to test, running it on like news feeds versus like reels versus like, stories, like all these are different placements. Again, 50-50, we don't test it that often. And then devices, you want to run only to mobile, that kind of stuff. Like there's a whole bunch of things you could test, but primarily you want to be testing like creative, copy, audience, headline, those kinds of things. Beautiful. Now, last couple notes that I want to talk to you about before we close out this section. We talk about consistent ad work. Number one, just a warning reminder, your ads are going to stop working. Okay, we talked about this already. I'm going to warn you again. This is a very big warning. If you are not creating new copy and new creative, right, which is by far the hardest thing to be consistent with on a regular basis, at least weekly, at least bi-weekly, right? If you are not doing that, your ads will stop working and you will be eventually stuck, right? You need to find winners. You need to make sure that you are performing and, looking for outperforming the winners that you currently have. This is the reason why consistent ad work is a step in the entire daily management process. You must make sure that you have this ongoing in the background and you have this creation testing machine, so that way you have that bank of winners, so that way you are not stuck when you need the lead generation flow into your acquisition system. You do not end up getting stuck. Very, very, very important. Okay. Understand that? That's point number one. Point number two, testing sequence. Okay. We've already talked about this, but normally what you do is you target audiences, then creative, and then headline, and then copy, or you can test copy and then headline. Okay. But it all depends how much leads do you actually need, and then how much testing budget are you allocating to that. Point number three, I'm gonna go through this very quickly. Always only test one variable at a time. We've talked about this in the past. This is the cardinal rule of testing. Only ever test one variable at a time. So let's say, for example, you start off testing audience. Well, after you test our audience, you take notes, you look at what worked, and then from there, you go ahead and then zoom out, you take some notes, and then you go ahead and say, cool, this is the audience that worked. I'm now going to go ahead and look at the data, and I'm now going to test the creative. Cool. Which is the creative that's going to work? I'm going to go ahead and repeat. Launch, monitor daily, look at the data, judgment day, go ahead and take notes, and then go ahead and go on to the next testing. Headline, copy. But it's always going to be only one variable at a time. Are you ever testing? This is very, very, very important. I hope that makes 100% absolute sense. Now, if anything that we talked about in this training at all, right? We've talked about all 4 steps of the daily management process. We've talked about consistent ad work, the swipe file, the recommendations that we have around ad copy, ad creative, audience, headline. We talked about, the actual testing process. If you have any questions about any of that, make sure you actually do go ahead and ask inside of the student community, so that way one of the community members can go ahead and help you. We have an amazing community of people who are very, very knowledgeable and very, very understanding of the process and who are even ahead of you. So that way they can go ahead and give you that feedback. But again, make sure you ask, otherwise you will not know if you are actually struggling, okay? But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the daily management process for profitable acquisition. We will catch you in the next training.